Grace questioned him for 3 straight hours. Not because she was slow, because she was Grace Augustine. She sat cross-legged on the glowing moss with a day-top pad balanced on one knee, her stylus moving in sharp, efficient strokes. The shorthand was familiar to Chase. He had seen it before in James Chen's academic papers. Same formatting, same categories, same ruthless organization. Grace Augustine had trained her students to record the world the way she did. And James Chen had been her student. Before he became a corpse whose face Chase now wore. The irony sat inside him like a knife he refused to draw. Start with the mechanics, Grace said. Her eyes were dry again. Whatever emotion had broken through earlier had been sealed away behind discipline and habit. You said Eywa created a system interface. Define interface. Define system. And I want specifics, not poetry. Chase exhaled. When I made Sahelo with the Grotto's route network. When? Day 4. My second expedition. Grace wrote that down immediately. 11 days before she had started checking his GPS logs. 17 days before this conversation. Chase could almost feel the scientist in her grinding her teeth over the missing data. Continue. The connection triggered something inside Eywa's planetary network. My consciousness is abnormal. Not NA6. Not a standard avatar driver either. Eywa noticed the difference and created a partition inside herself. A smaller network within the larger one. A sandbox, Grace said. Exactly. Like quarantine in computing. Except she didn't isolate the anomaly to destroy it. She gave it tools. Grace's stylus paused. What kind of tools? Administrative access to the partition. The ability to claim territory nodes. Bind citizens. Build biological infrastructure. Grace wrote faster. And the binding, she said. You said Adenite and Sanom are bound. Norm is bound. Her voice tightened slightly when she said Norm's name. The mentor in her had just realized her student had undergone a permanent neural alteration and hidden it from her. Define binding. So Chase did. He explained that Sahelo-based connection. The permanent neural link. The shared awareness of emotion, location, physical condition. The ability to communicate mentally within range. The stat boosts inside claimed territory. The sensory bleed. The emotional bleed. The fact that once someone was bound, they were no longer entirely alone inside their own mind. Adenite added what Chase could not. His English grew more formal when he spoke of sacred things, each word careful and heavy. He described the Utral Imokria, the Tree of Binding, the ancient keeper legends, and the prophecy preserved by the Relang when the larger clans had forgotten. Grace's stylus stopped at the word prophet. I'm not a prophet, Chase said. I know, Grace replied without looking up. But the Relang framework matters. It suggests this has happened before. Either Eywa's network has created something similar in the past, or NA6 oral history preserved the memory of it. She turned to Adenite. How old is the Utral Imokria tradition? The oldest songs count more than 20 generations, Adenite said, both hands resting on his staff. Perhaps 30, from before the great clans, when the people were still scattered. 600 to 900 years at minimum, Grace murmured, assuming 30-year generations. She wrote the number down and underlined it. So this is not a fluke. Eywa's network has created administrator-class interfaces before. This is a pattern. The grotto hummed. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was agreement. Either way, the bioluminescent roots brightened as Grace spoke the word pattern, as if the network itself had become interested in being analyzed. Then Grace looked at Chase. I want to see the interface. You already know what I've described. I don't want your description. I want to see what you see through Tsahelu. Chase went still. That requires binding. I know. Norm, who had been quiet since they arrived, shifted uneasily. Through the bond came his concern, warm and protective. The student worrying about his teacher. Grace noticed. I'm not asking permission, Norm, she said, gentle but immovable. I'm informing you of my decision. If you want to debate methodology, we can do that after. I'm not trying to stop you, Norm said. His voice cracked, not from fear, but from the impossible weight of trying to explain something that words were too small to hold. I just want you to understand what it feels like. It isn't like reading data. It's like becoming part of the data. You feel everything. Everyone. The wolf. The plants. Adenite's faith. Sanem's hope. Chase's. He stopped. Some things the bond revealed were too private to say aloud. Grace looked at Chase. 2 avatar bodies. 2 pairs of golden eyes. 1 face hiding nothing. 1 face hiding a dead man. The binding is permanent, Chase said quietly. 2-directional. I'll sense your emotional state. You'll sense mine. The network will carry your consciousness with everyone else's. I don't fully understand the reversal process. If you do this, you're committing to something I may not be able to undo. Grace almost smiled. Almost. To the most important scientific discovery in human history, she said. I've committed to worse things on weaker evidence. Then she extended her cue. The neural braid unfolded with practiced ease. Grace had made thousands of Sahelo connections in 15 years on Pandora. Plants, trees, ritual sites, living systems beyond human understanding. But this one was different. Her hand trembled as the glowing tendrils reached for Chase's. Contact. Soul binding initiated. Target, Dr. Grace Augustine human, avatar body. Specialization, xenobiologist/science lead. Bond tier, 1 surface link. Cost, 10 NE. Current NE, 50/100. Note: Senior Human Citizen. Scientific Authority Integration. Grace Augustine entered the network like a dam breaking. Norm's binding had been a gentle current. Adonite's had been an act of sacred surrender. Grace was a flood. 15 years of data, questions, theories, field notes, failures, and stubborn belief surged through the bond. She did not simply receive the network. She examined it. In real time. Every sensation became data. Every pulse of bioluminescence became a measurement. Every electromagnetic fluctuation was compared against old models. Neural density patterns were checked against years of baseline observations. The structure of the living tissue beneath them was instantly catalogued against published literature. Grace's mind was not joining the network. It was auditing it. And beneath all that analysis, Chase felt the emotion she had buried. Awe, grief, love. The awe she had denied herself after the school was closed. The grief she had turned into research papers. The love for Pandora she had disguised as scientific terminology because raw devotion was dangerous in an institution that treated sentiment like weakness. The bond revealed it all. Not cruelly, gently, like moss shaping itself around a sleeping body. Grace Augustine loved this world with a ferocity her professional mask could never contain. And the network received that love like roots drinking rain. Citizen bound, Dr. Grace Augustine. Citizen number 6. Plus 50 SP Senior Human Citizen bonus. Plus 150 SP Science Lead milestone. First Specialist Citizen. Faith Generation. Plus 0.5 FP/day. Unlocked. Research Project Framework. Scientific citizens can generate SP through discovery. Grace's eyes remained closed. Tears slipped down her cheeks again, but this time they were quieter. Not shock. Not grief. Overflow. The mind could only contain so much beauty before it began to leak. I can feel him, she whispered. The wolf. He's waiting to see if I'm pack. Through the bond came Shadowfang's attention. Cautious. Patient. Predatory. The alpha assessed the new citizen with tools older than language, scent, posture, heartbeat, emotional truth. Then his judgment passed through the link as a clean, instinctive impression. Strong. Useful. Pack-worthy. Grace laughed. It was bright, broken, and beautiful. The sound echoed through the grotto. This is what Sahela should feel like, she said. The same words Norm had used. Because there were no better ones. Adonite crossed the chamber and placed both hands on Grace's shoulders. It was the same welcome he had given Norm, but this time his posture carried something more. Recognition. Not of a student. Not of a convert. Of a peer. One who hunts truth, he said. Welcome to the binding. Grace wiped her face. Then she picked up her day top hat. Her stylus found her hand as naturally as breathing. Wonder, grief, and professional instinct fought for control. Professional instinct won by a narrow margin. All right, she said, sniffing once before clearing her throat. We need documentation protocols, research frameworks, safety procedures for the binding process, informed consent records, even if we have to write them retroactively. Norm, start cataloging the network's biosignatures by phylum. Then she turned to Chase. Her eyes burned with the focus of a scientist who had just been handed the keys to an impossible laboratory. Chase, I need the complete system status. Every stat, every resource, every ability. If I'm going to understand this network, I need raw data. Chase stared at her. She's been bound for 45 seconds, he said, and she's already reorganizing the operation. Through the bond came Norm's warm amusement. Told you. She always takes charge. Chase opened the interface. Through the shared awareness of the bond, he made it visible to Grace. The translucent system display unfolded in her peripheral vision, showing menus, resource counters, territory data, citizen status, and all the strange architecture Eywa had shaped for a human origin mind. Grace froze. Then her stylus moved.
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
Filled her day top hat in neat columns. Categories formed. Headings appeared. The first scientific documentation of a planetary consciousness's administrative interface began on glowing moss beneath the roots of a sacred tree. For God's sake, Grace muttered without looking up. You've been running this with no formal methodology. No control groups. No longitudinal tracking. No baseline comparisons. No, Grace. What? Welcome to the team. She glanced up. The corner of her mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile. Grace Augustine did not smile at avatar drivers. But it was close. Don't welcome me, she said. Brief me. We have work to do. From her ledge, Tisei-lan watched in silence. The knife rested across her lap, its blade catching the grotto's blue-green glow. She had seen everything. The binding. The tears. The immediate shift into command. Through Sanem's awareness, Chase caught the warrior's expression. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Evaluating. As always, Tisei-lan measured every change by one question. Does this make us safer, or more vulnerable? With Grace Augustine, the answer was simple. Both. The alert hit Hell's Gate security at 1847. Dr. Grace Augustine, principal investigator of the Avatar Program's Science Division, had missed 3 scheduled check-ins. Her biosign transponder was cutting in and out. Last confirmed location, Sector 7, Grid 47 East. Status, overdue. Chase learned all of this because Norm's day top had started buzzing with the base-wide warning while they were still 2 kilometers from the perimeter fence, walking back through the dim jungle with legitimate specimens in their packs and a secret none of those specimens could explain. 18 hours, Grace said. Her voice was calm, almost clinical. The same woman who had broken down in the grotto and then reorganized the sanctuary's research structure within the same afternoon was now calculating risk like she was reviewing lab results. That is 6 hours past my authorized window. Norm's worry flared through the bond. Chase felt it as a hot, sharp pressure, rising fast and vertical like a geyser. Selfridge will be waiting at the gate, Norm said. He treats your absences differently than ours. You're the program lead. Your safety is a budget issue. Charming. Grace adjusted the strap of her field kit. The sensor array inside had already been wiped of every sanctuary reading and filled instead with acceptable neural density data from the outer transect. The specimen containers beside it supported the cover story well enough. 18 hours of fieldwork. 5 hours of usable documentation. 13 hours of unexplained stillness. Through the bond, Chase could feel Grace thinking. Not panic. Calculation. Her mind moved through every question Selfridge might ask, building answers the way she built research proposals. Clean logic, firm methodology, no gaps for someone to pry open. The stream crossing delayed our return. Equipment recalibration was required after electromagnetic interference. Standard procedure for neural density studies in high-activity zones. That will not work, Chase sent through the link. The GPS logs show we entered the anomalous zone at 0930 and stayed there until 1600. That does not look like recalibration. It looks like camping. Then we collected specimens sequentially instead of simultaneously, Grace replied. Extended baseline measurements for each neural density reading. The methodology requires. Grace. He is not going to argue methodology with you. He is going to look at 18 hours, 3 missed check-ins, and decide whether the lead scientist of the Avatar program has become a liability. The bond went quiet. Ahead of them, the jungle began to thin. The massive canopy broke apart, replaced by the managed clearing surrounding Hell's Gate. Floodlights glowed through the last line of trees. I will handle Selfridge, Grace said. Her tone changed. The warmth disappeared, replaced by the colder voice she used when institutional politics demanded a blade instead of a scalpel. You two stay quiet. Let me take point. The perimeter gate was already lit. Not the usual evening lights. These were high-output security floods, turning the approach road white and harsh, stripping away shadows until the whole place looked like a crime scene. Martinez stood at the gate. A medical tech waited beside him with a portable scanner. Behind them stood Parker Selfridge, wearing a windbreaker thrown hastily over office clothes. His expression carried that familiar mix of irritation and concern administrators reserved for employees who created problems by almost getting themselves killed. Grace, Selfridge said. His voice was flat. Not angry, exactly. Tired. The voice of a man who had stayed late because the Avatar program's most famous scientist had gone dark in the field. 18 hours. No comms. 3 missed check-ins. Equipment malfunction, worsened by electromagnetic interference in the high-density zone. Grace placed her field kit on the scanning table. The M readings in that sector are extreme. I'm recommending a formal interference study before any future expeditions. It is making our electronics unreliable. And you did not shelter in place and wait for rescue because I was conducting time-sensitive research that required continuous presence, and the interference made outbound communication unstable. Her delivery was perfect. Every sentence had already been prepared and shaped for one specific listener, a corporate administrator who cared more about budget justification than field science. The data we collected will take weeks to analyze. I would rather discuss that than my punctuality. Selfridge's jaw tightened. Behind him, Martinez's day top had showed the incident log. Chase caught a glimpse of it. A growing file. Grace Augustine's name had now joined the repeated entries already connected to James Chen. Medical scan, Selfridge said. Standard protocol after extended field exposure. Fine. The medical tech stepped forward and ran the scanner over Grace. It was a full-spectrum biosign analysis, mapping neural activity, cardiovascular function, immune response, and half a dozen other metrics meant to detect Pandora pathogens or toxic exposure. Grace stood perfectly still with her arms at her sides, the ideal patient. The scan finished. The tech frowned, then tapped the display, then frowned again. Something wrong? Selfridge asked, leaning closer. Neural mapping is showing anomalous patterns, the tech said. Connection signatures that do not match Dr. Augustine's baseline from her last quarterly evaluation. He enlarged part of the display. Colored neural pathways spread across the screen. To Chase, the pattern looked painfully familiar. It looked like the bond. Its architecture rendered in medical imaging. Probably calibration error, the tech continued. The electromagnetic interference she mentioned could have left residual artifacts in the scanner readings. Log it, Selfridge said. Flag it for follow-up if it appears again during the next evaluation. The tech logged it. Just like that, the data entered the system. A medical anomaly flag attached to Grace Augustine's personnel file. A record of neural patterns that did not exist in any human baseline because they were not human. They were the fingerprints of Eywa's network pressed into avatar biology. Evidence. Permanent. Searchable. One curious technician or routine audit away from asking questions no cover story could answer. Through the bond, Grace's fury hit Chase like heat along his nerves. Not anger at the scan itself. Anger at the need to hide. 15 years of institutional politics had taught Grace to cover emotion with professional control, but the bond tore that mask away. Chase felt the rage clearly. The rage of a scientist forced to conceal the most important discovery of her life because the institution she worked for would turn it into a weapon. Selfridge stepped closer to Grace and lowered his voice. The words were meant to be private, but Chase's avatar hearing caught every one of them. The bond carried them even sharper through Grace's own perception. 3 more incidents like this and you're on administrative leave. I cannot protect the avatar program if you keep giving Quaritch ammunition. Grace's face did not move. Understood. I mean it, Grace. Quaritch has been asking questions about the avatar drivers and their extended absences. Your name came up. If he gets involved. He will not, Grace said. I will keep the fieldwork within parameters. Selfridge studied her for 3 silent seconds. Whatever he was searching for, guilt, evasion, fear, he found nothing. Grace Augustine had been lying to administrators since before Selfridge ever took the job. She was better at it than Chase and Norm combined. Get some rest, Selfridge said. File your report by 0800. Then he left. Martinez followed him. The medical tech packed the scanner and headed toward the clinic, carrying Grace's neural anomaly into the database with him. The gate cleared. For a moment, the 3 of them stood alone in the floodlit space between jungle and compound, carrying a secret that had just gained its first official piece of institutional evidence. Grace's quarters were officer grade, larger than the shared barracks. Private bathroom. A desk with a working holographic display. She opened the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey, and poured 3 fingers into a glass. She swallowed the first finger before Chase and Norm had even finished closing the door. The neural scan, she said, setting the glass down hard. The binding leaves traces in the neural architecture. The tech logged it as a calibration artifact, but any competent neurologist who reviews that data will see organized connection patterns that do not match standard Sahalo. How long before someone reviews it? Norm asked. Quarterly evaluation is in 6 weeks. Grace poured another finger. If Quaritch requests an early review, which Selfridge just warned us he might, then we may have days instead of weeks. Anxiety passed through the bond. 3 minds began working through the same problem from different directions. Norm focused on bureaucracy. Who could access medical files? Which reports triggered review protocols? Which departments shared databases? Grace focused on neuroscience. What exactly the scan showed? How far it differed from baseline? Whether the anomaly could be blamed on environmental interference. Chase focused on the larger strategy. How many pieces of evidence already existed? How they connected? How close they were to forming a pattern obvious enough that even a casual observer could not ignore it. Max Patel flagged my neural conductivity on day 1, Chase said. The comms tech logged my transponder gaps. Martinez filed 4 incident reports. Now the medical tech has documented Grace's anomalous neural patterns. Each piece is sitting in a different file, controlled by a different department. But if someone pulls them together, we need to reduce our exposure at Hell's Gate, Chase said. Grace, you mentioned research protocols. Can you create a framework that justifies longer field presence? Something formal enough that Selfridge approves it as a program initiative instead of treating every trip like an individual expedition request. Grace finished the second finger of whiskey. Then she picked up her datapad and started typing. Long-term neural density monitoring project, she said. Multi-site, continuous presence methodology. Dedicated field team. 2 or 3 researchers rotating through a base camp in a high-density sector. Her fingers moved faster than her words. I submit it as a formal research proposal. Selfridge approves it because it produces publishable results that justify the Avatar program's budget. We get permanent field authorization for Sector 7 without repeated expedition requests. Will Selfridge approve it? Norm asked. He will approve anything that makes RDA look like it is funding real scientific breakthroughs. Grace did not look up from the screen. RDA-funded scientists discover new alien neural network behavior is exactly the kind of headline that keeps the funding committee happy. She stopped typing. Then she looked at them. The irony is that the research is real. The data from that sanctuary is worth more than every paper I have published in 15 years. We are hiding the truth inside the truth. Through the bond came the quiet satisfaction of a plan beginning to work. 3 minds aligned. 3 different kinds of expertise converging on a solution that did not fight the institution directly, but used its own machinery against it. Norm's datapad buzzed. A message from the Xenolinguistics department. Some scheduling conflict. A faculty meeting. Administrative noise from a base that had no idea what 3 of its people had just committed themselves to protecting. Grace poured a 3rd finger, but this time she sipped slowly. The warmth of the whiskey entered the bond as a faint biological echo, filtered through an avatar body that processed alcohol faster than a human one. The research proposal goes to Selfridge tomorrow, Grace said. I will frame it as my initiative. That separates it from your incident history. Norm, I will need your xenolinguistics data to justify the cross-disciplinary team structure. Chase, keep the sanctuary specimens coming. Quality data is our armor. Through the bond, Chase felt Grace's thoughts moving fast. Methodology. Objectives. Timeline. Personnel requirements. The professional framework of the proposal took shape in her mind. But beneath it, visible only because the bond allowed no perfect hiding, was fear. Real fear. Personal fear. The fear of a woman who had spent 15 years protecting something she loved, only to discover that it was far larger, far more important, and far more fragile than she had ever imagined. Grace set the glass down. The bottle went back into the drawer. Her professional mask returned, piece by piece. Armor locking into place. We have 6 weeks before the quarterly evaluation, she said. Possibly less if Quaritch gets involved. She lifted the data pad. The outline of the proposal glowed on the screen. Sector 7 Neural Monitoring Initiative. The first formal document in what would become the scientific shield around everything the sanctuary produced. 6 weeks to make this project so valuable that denying us field access costs Selfridge more than granting it. Through the bond, the network hummed. 6 citizens now. 3 at Hell's Gate. 3 at the sanctuary. All connected by a biological architecture that RDA's best instruments had already detected, but did not yet understand. 1 medical anomaly flag in a database. 1 administrator warning them about Quaritch. 1 security officer with a growing file of incident reports. And beneath all of it, beneath the fear, planning, and institutional maneuvering, there was the faint, steady pulse of something planetary. Eywa, watching through roots, vines, and bioluminescent tissue, monitoring her investment. The foreign soul and his growing network. The sandbox experiment that was becoming something even the experimenter might not have fully predicted. Before Grace turned out the lights and let the whiskey pull her toward sleep, one last thought passed through the bond. Not words. An image. The grotto glowing around them. Adonite's face as he said welcome. The moment Grace's fingertips touched Chase's palm and the universe became larger. Norm's mind drifted toward rest in the barracks, his anxiety slowly replaced by the exhausted calm of someone who had survived the worst day of his cover identity and gained something worth the terror. Far away, at the sanctuary, the other bonds remained alive across kilometers of jungle. Adonite's evening chant. Sainum sleeping against Shadow Fang. The Watcher vine swaying in the night breeze. Tisei Lan on her ledge with a knife in her lap, watching the stars through a break in the canopy. Chase sat on his bunk. The final warning documentation was still hidden in his drawer. Martinez's reports were still in the system. The medical anomaly was still logged in Grace's file. But the network was stronger now. The team was real. And the research proposal on Grace's datapad was the first brick in a wall between the sanctuary and the people who would tear it apart if they ever understood what it was. 6 weeks. Maybe less. Chase closed his eyes and let the bond carry him toward sleep, shared across 6 separate bodies breathing in rhythm beneath the dark. Quaritch had started asking questions. The medical anomaly sat in the database. 6 citizens. 1 node. And the first real institutional cover was finally taking shape. The system notification hit at 0743, 2 days after Grace had filed her research proposal and 1 day after Selfridge had approved it with the kind of bureaucratic speed that only happened when someone wanted good news for a quarterly report. Territorial alert priority, high. External threat detected, mechanized column approaching network proximity. Estimated arrival at territory boundary, 5 days. Threat class, infrastructure non-combat. Environmental destruction imminent. I was sitting in Grace's lab, cross-referencing neural density data for the research initiative's first formal submission, when the red-bordered text cut across my vision. The stylus in my hand stopped moving. Through the bond, Shadow Fang's hackles rising at the sanctuary, the wolf's territorial instinct translating the alert into something biological. Adonite's chant breaking mid-syllable. Sainum's fear sharp, bright, the boy's trauma receptors firing at any signal that smelled like the machine's. Norm. Through the link, instant, I see it. Give me 5 minutes. Norm was 3 corridors away, in the xenolinguistics lab. His access to the RDA's operational planning database was legitimate cross-referencing avatar program logistics with military scheduling was standard practice for researchers who needed to avoid active operation zones during field work. Nobody questioned a xenolinguist pulling convoy routes. They'd question why he was pulling them at 0743 on a day he wasn't scheduled for field work, but Norm had learned to mask his searches inside legitimate queries. Grace's hand found my wrist. Not through the bond physically. She'd been reviewing my data entries when my body went rigid, and 15 years of working with avatar drivers in crisis had given her the instinct to ground people through contact. What is it? System alert. Mechanized column. 5 days from the sanctuary's boundary. Her grip tightened. Through the bond, the scientist calculating threat vectors while the citizen processed territorial fear. Grace's dual-nature academic rigor welded to network loyalty produced a response that was uniquely hers, cold analysis running parallel to hot protectionism. Pull the root data. I need specifics before we respond. Norm's intelligence arrived through the bond in compressed packets faster than email, more detailed than verbal summary. RDA Operational Order 2152-47, Mineral Survey Preparation, Sector 8 Corridor. 3 Cat-class bulldozers, 2 support vehicles, 8 personnel including security escort. Mission, clear a survey route from the Sector 8 staging area through secondary growth forest to a mineral deposit flagged by orbital imaging. Estimated duration, 72 hours of continuous operation. The route map overlaid the system's territorial display in my vision. A red line cutting southeast through jungle that included, in its path, a grove 3 kilometers from the sanctuary where 17 generations of Ralang dead lay buried under roots that now pulsed with the network's awareness. They're going to bulldoze through a graveyard. The Relang Ancestral Grove. Adonite's history. Tisei Lan's mother. Through the bond, Adonite's awareness sharpened to a point. The elder had felt the alert, processed the territorial data, and reached the same conclusion before Chase could articulate it. His emotional register shifted from meditative calm to something Chase had never detected from him, a cold, ancient fury that the chanting had kept contained for 67 years. The machines come for our dead. Not a question. A statement with the weight of prophecy fulfilled the Relang elder who'd watched bulldozers eat his clan's living forest, now watching them return for the bones. Grace closed the lab door, locked it, pulled the window blinds. Show me everything. The system's territorial map expanded across Chase's visual field, shared through the bond to Grace and Norm simultaneously. The sanctuary pulsed at center blue, stable, the grotto's 5 kilometers radius of influence marked in concentric rings. 3 kilometers northwest, a second signature, the Relang Ancestral Grove, where root networks carried the fading electromagnetic echoes of buried Na6, their biological residue integrated into Eywa's planetary architecture over decades. The bulldozer route cut through the grove's eastern edge. Not a full traversal, the clearing operation would destroy approximately 40% of the root network that connected the graves to the broader system. Enough to sever ancestral connections. Enough to desecrate. Options. Grace's voice was her grant proposal voice, the one that demanded structure, clarity, actionable recommendations. List them. Through the bond, the network's collective intelligence processed in parallel. 6 minds 7, counting Tisei Lan's unbound presence through Sainum's perception, approaching the problem from different angles. Do nothing. The path of least resistance. Let the bulldozers clear the route, lose the ancestral grove, maintain cover. Cost, Adonite's trust, Tisei Lan's cooperation, the Relang survivors' reason for staying. The network's spiritual foundation, cracked at the root. Evacuate. Move the Relang to the sanctuary proper, abandon the grove, start over elsewhere. Cost, territorial retreat, loss of the only site with ancestral significance, confirmation to the Relang that the Dreamwalker's protection was conditional. Open confrontation. Deploy citizens and creatures to physically block the bulldozer column. Cost, immediate RDA military response, certain discovery, probable destruction of everything they'd built. Sabotage. Targeted disruption of the convoy equipment, failure, route obstruction, communication interference designed to delay or reroute the operation without revealing the network's existence. Cost, risk of discovery if the sabotage is traced, escalation if it's attributed to hostile action, and the moral weight of attacking the organization that still provided Chase's cover identity. Sabotage. The word came out before the analysis finished. Not impulse conclusion. The only option that preserved both the grove and the cover. The only option that addressed the threat without triggering the cascade of consequences that open confrontation would create. Grace's eyes were sharp. Deniable. Has to be. Equipment failure. Environmental obstruction. Anything that looks like Pandora being Pandora rather than someone fighting back. Can you do it? Not alone. I need Norm for communications intelligence, you for technical analysis, and through the bond, Tisei Lan's presence burned at the network's edge. Not a citizen. Not connected. But present, through Sainum, through proximity, through the specific intensity of a woman whose mother's grave lay in the path of a bulldozer column she couldn't stop with a bone knife. And someone who knows that jungle better than any of us. Grace leaned back in her chair, the cigarette behind her ear a fresh one, the day's first sat unlit. She hadn't smoked inside since the binding. The network's shared sensory experience made second-hand smoke an irritant for 6 nervous systems instead of 1. 5 days. She picked up her day top pad. The stylus moved in rapid strokes, not notes this time, but a timeline. Milestones. Dependencies. The architecture of an operation that a xenobiologist was building with the same methodical precision she applied to research protocols. We need bulldozer technical specifications, fuel consumption rates, maintenance schedules, communication frequencies and check-in protocols, security escort rotation and coverage gaps. Through the bond, Norm, already compiling. The Xenolinguist's RDA database access produced a stream of data convoy specifications, equipment manuals, maintenance logs flowing through the mental link in organized packets that Grace caught, sorted, and filed faster than any verbal briefing could manage. The map glowed in Chase's vision. The bulldozer route, a red line of destruction that didn't know it was about to encounter something the RDA's operational planners hadn't accounted for. A team. Mismatched, undertrained, held together by neural bonds and the specific stubbornness of people who'd found something worth defending. Grace. Chase met her eyes. What happens when sabotage isn't enough? The question hung in the locked lab, weighted with every scenario the bond's parallel processing had generated and discarded. Grace's stylus stopped. Then we figure out the next option. But let's make damn sure sabotage is enough first. The Relang Ancestral Grove was smaller than the sanctuary, a clearing in old-growth canopy, maybe 30 meters across, where generations of burial had enriched the soil until the root network beneath it hummed with a density that rivaled the grotto. I knelt at the grove's edge. Shadow Fang held position 10 meters south, nose working the air. Through the bond, the wolf's territorial assessment, mapping this new space the way he'd mapped every approach to the sanctuary. No threats. No recent predator activity. Just the deep organic scent of soil that had been receiving the dead for longer than any living Na6 could remember. At night walked the grove like a man walking through a house he'd built. His staff tapped the ground at each marker, flat stones set flush with the earth, each one carved with symbols that weren't NA6 script but something older. Clan marks. Family names. The genealogical record of a people who stored their history in soil and song. He stopped at 17 markers. Whispered at each one. I didn't ask for names. The bond carried fragments, flickers of Adonite's memory triggered by proximity. A woman who laughed like water over stones. A hunter whose arrows flew straighter than anyone else's. Twin children born during a storm. A grandmother who knew every medicinal plant in a territory that no longer existed. Tisei Lan stood at the grove's northern perimeter. She'd insisted on coming, not asked, not been invited. Simply materialized at the sanctuary's entrance when Chase and Adonite departed, knife at her hip, face carrying the specific blankness of someone suppressing an emotional event large enough to flatten anyone less armored. Her mother was buried here. Chase knew this not because Tisei Lan had said so, she hadn't said anything since the three of them left the grotto, but because the bond carried Sainum's knowledge, and Sainum had told Shadowfang during their nighttime conversations at the pool, and Shadowfang's memory was network accessible if you knew where to look. The boy had also mentioned, in the indirect way of relaying children sharing grief, that Tisei Lan visited the grave every night for 2 years before the RDA cleared the surrounding forest and cut off safe access. That she'd stopped going on the same day she'd stopped speaking her mother's name aloud. She's standing 15 meters from her mother's grave and acting like she's on a standard security patrol. The only tell is the knife grip, white-knuckled, the bone creaking under pressure that has nothing to do with combat readiness. The system interface pulsed. Valid node location detected. Relang Ancestral Grove Neural Density, 712/CM superscript 3. Node type available, resource node. Cost, 50 NE, 2 hours continuous Tsahalo. Benefits, passive genetic sample quality plus 10%, ancestral memory access, faith generation times 1.5 in territory. A resource node. Different from the sanctuary, specialized, focused on the grove's unique biological properties. The ancestral burials had enriched the root network with NA6 genetic material and neural pattern echoes that the system classified as harvestable resources. Not disrespectful, the network treated the dead the way a forest treats fallen trees. Material recycled. Energy redistributed. Nothing wasted. But the claiming would bind this place to my network permanently. The Relang graves would become my responsibility. Their protection would become my obligation. If the bulldozers came and I failed, the failure wouldn't just be strategic, it would be a betrayal of the dead. Adonite. I stood. The elder looked up from his 17th marker. I can claim this grove. Bind it to the network the way I bound the sanctuary. It would protect the root system, strengthen the connection to your ancestors, and give us a defensive foothold against the convoy. The elder's amber eyes held mine. Through the bond, the weight of what I was offering. Not just territory management, stewardship. The Dreamwalker taking formal responsibility for Relang Dad, a commitment that in NA6 tradition surpassed almost any other oath. The claiming requires Tsahalo with the root network. 2 hours. During that time, Eywa will examine my intentions regarding this place. If she finds them insufficient, she will not. Adonite's voice carried the absolute certainty of a man whose faith had been tested by bulldozers and validated by bioluminescence. You carry the mark of the keeper. The grove will accept you. I looked at Tisei Lan. She hadn't moved from the perimeter. Hadn't spoken. But her eyes tracked the conversation with the precision of a hunter tracking movement, every word catalogued, every implication weighed. I'm going to claim this grove as a territory node, I told her. Not asking permission. Not explaining the system's mechanics. Just the fact, delivered directly, respecting her preference for information without preamble. Your ancestors will be bound to my network. Protected by the same systems that protect the sanctuary. If I fail to defend them, the failure is mine. Silence. The jungle breathed around us. Bioluminescence from the grave markers pulsed in rhythms that matched the grove's heartbeat, slow, ancient, carrying frequencies that predated the NA6 language. You have taken responsibility for my ancestors now, Dreamwalker. Tisei Lan's voice was quiet, not soft compressed. The tonal equivalent of a blade pressed flat to give a clear message without cutting. If you fail them, I will kill you myself. The words were a death threat. They were also the first time Tisei Lan had acknowledged, however obliquely, that Chase might succeed. The threat only held weight if success was possible. If failure was certain, the threat was redundant. She knew this. Chase knew she knew it. Understood. I knelt at the grove's central root cluster. Extended my cue. The tendrils reached for the network's junction point, thinner roots here than the grotto's massive clusters, but denser in neural tissue, enriched by decades of biological integration with NA6 remains. Contact. Claim resource node initiated. Location, Relang Ancestral Grove. Neural density, 712/CM superscript 3. Estimated completion, 2 hours. The claiming was different from the sanctuaries. Not the raw data torrent of the first node, smoother, channeled through established neural pathways that the system had already built. Eywa recognized the administrator. The partition accepted the expansion. The grove's root network opened to the system's architecture like a door that had been waiting for the key. But underneath the technical process, memory. The ancestral grove's neural tissue carried echoes. Not full consciousnesses, those had dissolved into Eywa's broader network long ago, but impressions. Emotional residue. The way a room retains the scent of someone who lived there. Chase's Q, plugged into 17 generations of Relang dead, received fragments that were not his and could never be. A child's laughter, high and bright, from a time when the grove was surrounded by living forest and the only machines were tools of bone and wood. The satisfaction of a hunter returning with meat enough for the entire clan. The grief of a burial not recent, not ancient, somewhere in the middle of a history that stretched further than Chase's entire civilization. The warmth of a fire circle where stories were told in a language that had no written form because the stories lived in voices and the voices lived in roots and the roots lived forever. And one memory, sharper than the rest, a woman's hand on a child's shoulder, steadying, teaching, guiding. The hand belonged to someone who'd been tall even by NA6 standards, strong-fingered, scarred from a life of hunting and defending. The child's face was blurred by temporal distance, but the emotion was crystalline safety, ferocity, the specific combination of warrior and mother that produced a daughter who held knives the way other people held prayers. Tisei Lan's mother. The echo of her, preserved in root tissue, broadcasting through a connection her daughter couldn't access because her daughter wouldn't bind. She's 15 meters away from the closest she'll ever get to hearing her mother's voice, and she doesn't know it. The claiming completed. The grove's bioluminescence shifted the same reorganization that had transformed the sanctuary, biological systems acknowledging a new administrative authority. The grave markers pulsed brighter. The root network hummed with expanded bandwidth. The system's territorial display added a second circle to the map, smaller, specialized, the Relang Grove now linked to the sanctuary through underground route highways that carried data at binaural speeds. Resource node established Relang Ancestral Grove Level 1. Territory, 3 km radius from node center. Passive effects, genetic sample quality plus 10%, ancestral memory access, faith generation times 1.5. Nodes, 2/11ths, TRA capacity, plus 100 SP, second node bonus. System points, 375 SP. I stood. Wiped blood from my nose, the recurring neural overload bleed, fainter each time, the avatar body adapting to the strain of sustained Sahalo. The grove was mine now, the Relang dead were my responsibility, and the bulldozer column was 4 days from driving through the heart of it. Through the bond, at night's gratitude, vast and humbling. Sainum's excitement, carried from the sanctuary where he'd monitored the claiming through the network link. Shadow Fang's territorial expansion registered as a widening of the Alpha's patrol map, more ground to cover, more boundaries to mark. And from Tisei Lan, nothing. She'd turned her back to the grove during the claiming, faced the jungle, stood guard. When I passed her on the way back to the trail, she fell into step beside me, not behind, beside. The positioning of equals, or at least of people who shared a direction. She said nothing. Her knife was sheathed. Both facts meant something. The sanctuary's main chamber had never held this many bodies, and the moss carpet was learning to compensate. 6 people, 1 viper wolf, and a holographic display that existed only in the shared visual field of 5 bonded minds. The system's territorial map projected through the network link, visible to citizens as a ghostly overlay against the grotto's bioluminescent walls. Norm had refined it using RDA topographical data, converting military survey coordinates into the biological framework Chase's system used. The result was a 3-dimensional map that showed terrain, route networks, water systems, and the bulldozer column's projected route in a single integrated display. Grace sat cross-legged near the pool, daytop had balanced on one knee, stylus moving in the rapid shorthand she used when theoretical analysis met operational planning. Norm was beside her, his own daytop had open to the RDA's maintenance database, cross-referencing equipment specifications with the convoy's inventory manifest. Adonite occupied his customary position at the western wall, near Pikair's burial site. His staff lay across his knees. His eyes were closed, but through the bond, Chase sensed the elder's awareness tracking every detail of the conversation, the spiritual leader listening with the specific attention of a man whose ancestors' graves were the subject under discussion. Sainum crouched near the entrance, the bone pendant swinging as he shifted between drawings in the dirt. He'd been sketching the approach routes to the bulldozer corridor since dawn, each iteration more detailed, more accurate, the terrain he'd scouted over 3 days compressed into maps that his young hands drew with surprising precision. Shadow Fang held the perimeter. Standard operating procedure now. The Viper Wolf's territorial instinct had adapted to the sanctuary's rhythms, and his patrol route expanded automatically to include the new resource node's boundary. Through the bond, the wolf's sensory feed provided real-time surveillance data that supplemented the Watcher Vine's fixed coverage. And Tisei Lan sat on the ledge above the waterfall, the same position she'd occupied since arriving at the sanctuary, elevated, defensible, providing sightlines to both the grotto interior and the approaches beyond. She wasn't part of the bond. She wasn't part of the planning. She was listening. 3 Cat 900 series bulldozers. Grace didn't look up from her daytop hat. Each one weighs roughly 40 metric tons, runs on hydrogen fuel cells with 12-hour operational capacity, and communicates via short-range radio to a base station in the escort vehicle. The fuel cells are stored in external compartments on the left flank, armored, but the armor is designed for debris protection, not targeted interference. Meaning, Chase leaned forward. The map rotated in the shared visual field, zooming to the convoy's staging area. Meaning the fuel cells are sealed against environmental contamination, dust, water, organic debris, but the sealing mechanism is mechanical, not electronic. A physical obstruction in the intake manifold would trigger a shutdown protocol that looks exactly like a field malfunction. Through the bond, Norm's contribution, arriving in compressed data packets. Maintenance logs show the Cat 900S have a 17% field failure rate in Pandora conditions. Organic debris in the intake is the most common cause: seed pods, root fragments, fungal colonies that grow in the manifold during overnight idle. The maintenance crew expects at least one shutdown per operational day. So if we introduce organic matter into multiple intake manifolds simultaneously, it looks like Tuesday. Grace's mouth did the thing that wasn't a smile. Standard Pandora operating conditions. Nobody investigates organic debris because it happens every week. The plan was taking shape. Not elegant, necessary. The kind of operational architecture that Chase recognized from his Meridian Energy days, when project timelines required coordinating multiple teams across incompatible systems. Different tools, same principles: identify the bottleneck, apply pressure at the point of maximum leverage, make the disruption look like business as usual. Communication disruption. Norm pulled up the convoy's radio protocols. They check in every 90 minutes with Hell's Gate base. Miss 2 consecutive check-ins and a response team deploys. That gives us a 3-hour window between the last confirmed check-in and the earliest possible response. The communication array is on the escort vehicle. Chase asked. Roof-mounted. Single unit. No backup. Norm highlighted the vehicle on the map. If the array goes down, say, from a falling branch during transit through dense canopy, they lose contact with base. The protocol requires them to halt, attempt repair, and send a runner to the nearest relay station if repair fails. That's an additional 4 to 6 hours of delay. Grace nodded. Combine the fuel cell shutdowns with the communication loss. 3 bulldozers down for maintenance, escort vehicle unable to report. The convoy stops. The timeline shifts. If we can push the delay past 72 hours, the operational window closes and they have to reschedule. Reschedule means reauthorization from Selfridge, Norm added. Which means paperwork, which means weeks. Through the bond, the satisfaction of a plan that used institutional mechanics as weapons. The RDA's own bureaucracy, its maintenance protocols, its communication procedures all turned against the machine they served. But the plan had gaps. Physical gaps. Someone had to introduce the organic material into the intake manifolds, and someone had to bring down the communication array. Both tasks required proximity to a military-escorted convoy in dense jungle, during a 3-hour window, without being seen. I'll handle the fuel cells. The voice came from above. Every head turned. T-Sailan sat on her ledge, knife across her knees, looking down at the planning session with an expression that combined professional assessment with barely concealed contempt for the deliberation process. 3 bulldozers. 3 intake manifolds. I approach from the canopy. During the transit phase, the operators watch the ground, not the trees. Seed pods from the Eura vine cause the most common manifold failures. I've seen relaying hunters use them to disable survey equipment. 3 pods, 3 machines, 3 minutes. Silence. Grace's stylus stopped. Norm's daytop had dimmed. T-Sailan dropped from the ledge. The landing was silent, bare feet on moss, knees absorbing impact, body uncoiling into a standing position that placed her at the center of the planning circle. She'd been sitting above them for an hour, absorbing every detail, building her own operational model in parallel. The communication array. She pointed at Norm's vehicle schematic without touching it, reading the shared map through physical proximity and Sanom's bonded perception. You said it's roof-mounted. A single vine cable across the transit path at the right height shears the antenna without damaging the vehicle. Wind damage. Jungle hazard. It happens. Grace's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. That's actually brilliant. T-Sailan didn't acknowledge the compliment. Her eyes found Chase. Your scientists plan well, but they plan with data. Data does not move through the jungle at night. I do. The statement wasn't a boast. It was a resume. T-Sailan T. Atia Ralangadin, hunter, warrior, the last person alive who'd watched her clan's territory cleared by the same machines now rolling toward their graves. She'd spent 3 weeks running from the RDA's expansion with 3 survivors and no resources. She knew what bulldozers looked like up close, how security escorts deployed, which angles were dead zones and which were kill boxes. And she'd just volunteered for point. First in, last out. The approach routes. She turned to Sanom. The boy scrambled to his feet, dirt maps abandoned, and led her to the fresh drawings he'd been perfecting all morning. T-Sailan studied them with the focused intensity of a commander reviewing reconnaissance, traced the paths with her finger, corrected 2 sightline estimates that Sanom had miscalculated, and added 3 alternative extraction points that the boy's limited experience hadn't considered. When she finished, Sanom's drawings were transformed. Not a boy's practice sketches anymore, a tactical map. The kind of document that existed in military intelligence briefings, except drawn in Pandoran soil by a teenager and a woman who'd learned warfare by surviving it. Through the bond, Grace's admiration, genuine and unexpected. The scientist recognized competence regardless of its packaging, and T-Sailan's tactical input had reshaped the operation from an academic exercise into something executable. Assignments. Chase stood. The map rotated to show the full operational area: convoy route, approach vectors, extraction paths, timing windows. Norm, communications monitoring. You track the convoy's radio frequency from the sanctuary. If anything changes, schedule, route, escort strength, we abort. Norm nodded. His anxiety pulsed in the bond, but underneath it, resolve. Grace, technical oversight. You monitor the fuel cell shutdown sequence through whatever sensor access you can establish. If the shutdowns don't trigger correctly, you call it. I'll rig a remote electromagnetic sensor at the observation point. Grace was already writing. Passive monitoring. No signal emission. Should detect the fuel cell deactivation cycles from 300 meters. Adenite, you and Sanom hold the sanctuary. If this goes wrong, if we're discovered or intercepted, you activate the emergency protocol. Seal the grotto. Shut down non-essential systems. Go dark. Adenite's eyes opened. The elder looked at Chase with an expression that the bond translated as approval mixed with sadness, the look of a man sending others to defend what he could no longer defend himself. Eywa guides your hands, he said. Shadow Fang, your early warning. Through the bond, Chase pushed the operational parameters to the Viper Wolf patrol routes, sent priorities, alert thresholds. Shadow Fang absorbed them with the pragmatic efficiency of an apex predator receiving hunting instructions. If anything approaches the convoy escort perimeter that isn't us, you signal through the bond and we pull out. Shadow Fang's acknowledgement came as pure intention. Understood, will do. Pack is safe. Tisei Lan. Chase looked at the warrior. She stood at the center of the circle, knife on her hip, the tactical map's dirt lines visible on her knees from where she'd knelt to correct Sanom's work. Point. Intake manifolds and communication array. 3 minutes on target, then extraction south to the resource node boundary. I will be gone before they notice, she said. Not confidence, fact. The statement of someone who'd spent her entire life moving through jungle that tried to kill everything that made noise. And if something goes wrong. Tisei Lan's hand found her knife. Not a threat, a promise. The gesture of a woman who carried one weapon and had made it sufficient for 23 years of survival. Then something goes wrong for them. The planning session ended. Not formally the way planning sessions end when every detail has been assigned and every contingency mapped. People drifted to their positions. Norm back to his day top pad, refining communication intercept protocols. Grace to the healing pod, checking its charge in case someone came back injured. Adenite to his meditation spot, beginning a chant that would last until the operation concluded. Sanom stayed at his dirt maps. The boy had been trusted with a real task, escape route navigation, the responsibility that ensured everyone could get out if the operation went sideways. His hands were still drawing, still refining, his face carrying the fierce concentration of someone determined not to fail the people who'd finally trusted him with something important. The sanctuary hummed. Bioluminescence shifted to operational patterns, brighter at the work areas, dimmer at rest zones, the living architecture adapting to the rhythms of a community preparing for action. The map glowed in the shared visual field, routes, timings, contingencies, all of it rendered in biological light against grotto walls that had been bare stone when Chase first stumbled through the waterfall 20 days ago. 20 days. I tripped over a root on my first expedition and fell face first into the mud. Now I'm running a multi-person sabotage operation against the corporation that signs my paychecks, with a team that includes a scientist who smokes too much, a linguist who stress eats, an elder who thinks I'm a prophet, a teenager who draws war maps in the dirt, a wolf who doesn't know what a bulldozer is, and a warrior who still hasn't decided whether to trust me or kill me. Project management was easier. Through the bond, 6 heartbeats. Different rhythms, different bodies, different histories. All pointed at the same 3-hour window on day 28. Grace finished checking the healing pod. Crossed to where Chase stood at the grotto entrance, watching the waterfall catch the afternoon light. The plan is good, she said. Norm's intelligence is solid. Tisei Lan's tactical input is exceptional. A pause. But plans don't survive contact with the enemy. You know that. I managed project timelines for 7 years. Every plan deviated. The question is whether the deviation is recoverable. And if it isn't. Chase looked at the map. The bulldozer route. The ancestral grove. 17 markers in the earth, each one a name he'd felt through the network's memory. Then we figure out the next option. Grace lit her cigarette. Took one drag. Stubbed it out on the wet stone of the entrance wall. The smoke carried through the bond to 5 other nervous systems, and Norm's discomfort pinged across the link like a notification. 2 days, she said. 2 days of preparation. 2 days of waiting. 2 days during which 6 people and 1 Viper Wolf would refine a plan to disable 3 bulldozers and 1 communications array, using seed pods and vine cables and the institutional machinery of an organization that had no idea its own employees were working against it. The sabotage plan pulsed in the shared visual field, routes, timings, contingencies rendered in biological light against the grotto's living walls. More real than any project timeline Chase had built in his previous life. More consequential than any investor pitch he'd delivered on a rainy highway in Montana. Sanom perfected his extraction route for the 9th time. Erased it. Drew it again. The boy's concentration was absolute. The first assignment, the first trust, the first moment someone had looked at him and said, this matters and you're the one to do it. The grotto breathed. The bond hummed. And somewhere in the jungle, 3 bulldozers sat in a staging area, fuel cells charged, communication arrays calibrated, ready to cut a road through a graveyard that had just acquired a very specific kind of defender. Tisei Lan's knife didn't need sharpening. She'd honed it to a molecular edge 2 days ago using a stone she'd selected from the stream bed with the specificity of someone choosing a surgical instrument. The blade could split a leaf dropped on its edge. Chase had watched her test it. She was sharpening it anyway. The sound filled the sanctuary's upper chamber rhythmic, metallic, the bone handle and obsidian edge producing a frequency that the grotto's bioluminescence translated into subtle flickers along the western wall. Not a nervous habit. A ritual. The warrior's equivalent of prayer, performed on the night before something that didn't have a name because naming it made it real. Chase sat below the ledge with the system's tactical overlay active in his visual field. The sabotage plan glowed in biological light routes, timings, contingencies, personnel assignments. He'd reviewed it 19 times. The 20th wouldn't reveal flaws that 19 passes had missed, but his hands kept rotating the display, zooming in on waypoints, testing escape trajectories against terrain data that Sanem's dirt maps had already verified to centimeter accuracy. Through the bond, Grace at Hell's Gate, running final calculations on the electromagnetic sensor she jury-rigged from lab equipment. The sensor would detect fuel cell deactivation cycles from 300 meters passive, no signal emission, invisible to the convoy's electronic countermeasures. She'd tested it twice against the lab's backup generator. Both times, it had registered the shutdown within 4 seconds. Norm beside her, monitoring the RDA's operational communications channel. The convoy's schedule was unchanged: departure from Sector 8 staging area at 0600, transit through the clearing corridor at reduced speed, estimated arrival at the mineral survey site by 1400. 8 personnel. 2 security escorts armed with standard-issue sidearms and 1 mounted automatic weapon on the lead support vehicle. 1 mounted automatic weapon. Against 3 NA6 with bone weapons, 1 xenobotanist with no combat training, and a Viper Wolf who doesn't know what a gun is. The math hadn't improved since the planning session. If the stealth approach failed, if they were detected during the sabotage, the operation shifted from covert disruption to survival extraction, and the survival odds dropped from manageable to catastrophic. Shadow Fang paced the sanctuary perimeter. Through the bond, the wolf's agitation, picking up the network's collective tension and amplifying it through pack instinct feedback loops. The Alpha knew something was coming. Not the tactical details, those were human abstractions that Viper Wolf cognition couldn't parse. But the emotional register of 6 bonded minds preparing for danger transmitted through the network like a chemical signal, and Shadow Fang's response was the response of every pack predator since evolution discovered cooperation: protect, defend, fight if necessary. I closed the tactical display, opened it, closed it again. You are making yourself worse. Tisei Lan's voice came from above. The sharpening had stopped. She sat on the ledge with her legs dangling over the edge, a casual posture that was, for Tisei Lan, equivalent to another person's full emotional disclosure. I'm reviewing the plan. You are circling the plan the way prey circles a water hole, looking for danger in something that is already decided. She dropped from the ledge. The landing was silent, bare feet on moss, body absorbing the impact with the fluid mechanics of someone who'd been jumping from high places since childhood. The plan is sound. The danger is real. Sitting in the dark imagining failure does not reduce the danger. She's right. I managed projects for 7 years and I know she's right. Preparation has a point of diminishing returns, and I passed it 3 hours ago. What would you suggest? Tisei Lan crossed the grotto, picked up a leather wrap from the supplies Atenite had arranged near the healing pod, a strip of cured hide, soft from years of handling, decorated with Relang symbols Chase couldn't read. Hunter's meditation. She held the wrap out. If you die tomorrow because you can't center yourself, my ancestors' graves fall anyway. I would prefer you competent. The statement was the most words Tisei Lan had spoken to him in sequence since the knife-to-throat introduction in the jungle, and every one of them was practical rather than personal. Except for the word prefer, which in Tisei Lan's vocabulary occupied the same space that please occupied in other people's, a concession to social cooperation that cost more than it appeared. Show me. She sat across from him. Cross-legged, back straight, the knife laid across her knees in the same position Atenite held his staff. The leather wrap went around her wrist, a focal point, she explained, something to ground sensation in while the mind expanded outward. Close your eyes. Breathe from here. She touched her own diaphragm. Not here. She touched her chest. Chest breathing is human breathing. Panic breathing. Hunters breathe from the center. I adjusted. The avatar body's respiratory system responded differently to diaphragmatic breathing than a human body would. The lung capacity was enormous, and the deeper breath pattern engaged muscle groups along the ribcage that I hadn't consciously used since the transmigration. Air moved in slowly, filling spaces that had been compressed by weeks of shallow anxiety breathing. Better. Now, listen to the place. Not with ears, with the body. The sanctuary's rhythm was always present: the heartbeat pulse of the root network, the slow expansion and contraction of the living walls, the chemical hum of organisms processing data through biological architecture. I'd registered it as background noise since the node claiming. Now, breathing from the center, eyes closed, the rhythm filled the foreground, became the primary signal. The forest breathes, Tisei Lan said. Her voice was different, softer, the sharpened edges filed down to something instructional rather than combative. The teaching voice. A register she'd used with Sanem during perimeter drills, and was now, for the first time, directing at Chase. If your breathing matches, you become part of the breath. Prey does not see what is part of the forest. My heartbeat slowed. Not dramatically, a gradual alignment, the avatar's cardiac rhythm syncing with the grotto's bioluminescent pulse the way it had during the node claiming. But this time, the synchronization was voluntary, guided. Tisei Lan's technique provided the framework that the system's brute force approach had bypassed. Good. She corrected my hand position, fingers splayed on the moss, palms down, maximum surface contact. Her hands touched mine during the correction. Brief. Functional. The contact lasted 2 seconds. Neither of us acknowledged it. But through the bond indirectly, through Sainum's sleeping awareness, Chase caught a fragment of something from Lan's proximity. Not a bonded signal. More like body heat through a thin wall. Warmth that wasn't temperature. The meditation lasted 30 minutes. By the end, Chase's heartbeat matched the sanctuary's rhythm so precisely that the bioluminescence along the nearest wall pulsed in sync with his breathing. The tactical anxiety had drained, not disappeared, but settled, compressed into a manageable density that sat in his chest like a stone instead of flooding his circulatory system like acid. Lan stood, collected the leather wrap, sheathed her knife for the first time all evening. You will be adequate tomorrow. High praise. Do not make me regret teaching you. She turned to leave. Stopped. Her back was to him, the same back she'd turned after Pikaya's death, the Relang trust gesture that said, I do not consider you lethal. But this time, the stopping was different. A hesitation in the body language that had nothing to do with combat readiness or tactical assessment. She started to speak. The first syllable a soft consonant in NA6, not English, formed and died. She shook her head. Once. Returned to her weapons station on the upper ledge. The sharpening resumed, but the rhythm had changed. Faster. The sound of someone processing something they'd decided not to say. Chase sat on the moss. His heartbeat held the sanctuary's rhythm for another 10 minutes before his own nervous system reclaimed its tempo. What did she almost say? The bond carried no answer. Lan was unbound. Her thoughts were her own. Whatever had formed behind that single aborted syllable, whatever lived in the space between the warrior's pragmatism and the woman's grief, remained on the other side of a wall she'd built from Relang stubbornness and 23 years of loss. Through the bond, at night stirring from sleep near the western wall, the elder's awareness touched the network with the gentle probe of someone checking that all his people were present. Finding them. Settling back. Shadowfang's patrol loop tightened. The wolf's restlessness had diminished, the pack's alpha responding to the meditation's calming signal, the network's emotional register dropping from combat readiness to something closer to the focused patience of a hunting formation in ambush position. The sanctuary dimmed to deep cycle illumination. Violet and indigo. Conservation mode. The grotto saving energy for a morning that would demand everything it had. Somewhere in the darkness above the waterfall, Lan's blade scraped stone. And somewhere in the darkness below, Chase Sinclair breathed in rhythm with a world he'd claimed, counting hours until he had to defend it. Lan moved through the jungle the way water moves through rock, finding every crack, every gap, every path of least resistance, flowing without effort through terrain that would have tripped Chase 3 times in the first 100 meters. 2 hours before the convoy's departure from the Sector 8 staging area. 3 kilometers of jungle between the sanctuary's resource node and the camp perimeter, covered in 40 minutes of near-silent movement that left no trail a human tracker could follow. Chase was behind her. Not beside behind. She'd positioned him there without discussion, the way she positioned Sainum during perimeter drills, subordinate to the point, responsible for watching the angles that the lead couldn't cover. He'd accepted the assignment without argument. Lan knew this terrain. He didn't. In the Meridian Energy boardroom, Chase had chaired meetings. In the Pandora jungle at 0300, Lan chaired reality. Through the bond, Shadowfang, 200 meters to the east, paralleling their approach on a separate vector. The Viper Wolf's sensory feed overlaid Chase's vision in compressed data heat signatures ahead, movement patterns, the electromagnetic flicker of the camp's perimeter sensors. The RDA had deployed motion detectors at 50-meter intervals around the staging area. Standard issue. Calibrated for human-sized or larger organisms, with a 45-degree detection cone and a 3-second response delay. 3 seconds. In 3 seconds, Lan could cover 8 meters of ground in a crouch without making a sound audible beyond arm's reach. They'd tested it at the sanctuary. She'd done it in 2.4. Grace's voice through the bond, carried from Hell's Gate with the compressed clarity of citizen-to-citizen transmission, convoy comm traffic nominal. Departure schedule confirmed 0600. Security rotation at 0345 15 minutes from now. Copy, Chase sent back. Through the bond, not voice. The jungle was too quiet for words. Even breathing felt conspicuous. The camp appeared through the undergrowth at 0310, a cleared area 60 meters across, lit by portable floods that turned the surrounding canopy into a wall of whitewashed green. 3 Cat 900 bulldozers parked in a row, their hydrogen fuel cells humming at idle, the low-frequency vibration detectable through the ground before the machines became visible. 2 support vehicles flanked the bulldozers, one carrying the communication array, the other serving as the security escort's mobile post. 8 personnel. 6 asleep in the escort vehicle's deployment bay. 2 on patrol walking the perimeter in a clockwise loop, flashlights sweeping the tree line at intervals that Grace's data had predicted to within 30 seconds. Sainum. Status. The response came through the bond from the sanctuary, where Sainum crouched beside his dirt maps, tracking their position through the network's awareness. Southern approach clear. No movement on extraction route. Ready. The boy's voice was steady. 3 weeks ago, Sainum had been a terrified teenager clutching a bone pendant and a spear too big for him. Now he was running operational intelligence for a sabotage mission, his fear compressed to a manageable frequency by the network's shared resolve. Growth, earned in the specific currency of trust. Lan's hand came up. Fist closed. Stop. They froze. The patrol's flashlight swept the section of canopy directly above their position. 3 seconds of illumination that turned every leaf into a potential reflector, every shadow into a potential silhouette. Chase pressed himself against a trunk, blue skin invisible against bark that carried similar bioluminescent patterns. Lan had gone still against a root buttress, her war paint freshly applied, ochre and charcoal breaking her outline into abstract shapes that the human eye couldn't assemble into a body. The flashlight passed. The guard coughed. Moved on. Norm. Distraction ready? Ready. Sanom's fire kit is positioned at bearing 270, 50 meters from the southeastern sensor. The fire kit was Sanom's contribution: dry tinder and a spark mechanism assembled from materials the boy had gathered during his scouting runs. A small fire, contained, positioned to draw investigation without appearing deliberate. Pandora vegetation ignited easily in the right conditions. Lightning strikes caused brush fires regularly. Nobody would question a small blaze at the camp's perimeter. Ignite on my mark. Lan looked back at Chase. In the darkness, with only the camp's reflected floodlight to see by, her eyes were luminous. Not the aggressive yellow of their first meeting, when she'd pressed a knife to his throat and called him Dreamwalker like a curse. Something cooler. The focused intensity of a professional operating at full capacity, trusting the person behind her to do his job while she did hers. She held up 3 fingers. Then 2. Then 1. Mark. Through the bond, Sanom triggered the fire kit remotely, a mechanism he'd designed using vine tension and flint, activated by a pull cord connected to a root tendril that the network could stimulate at distance. The tinder caught. Flame bloomed at the southeastern perimeter, small, orange, exactly the kind of brush fire that security protocols required immediate investigation. The patrol guard's flashlight swung southeast. He shouted. The second guard emerged from behind the escort vehicle, sidearm drawn. Both moved toward the fire at a pace that said nuisance rather than threat. Standard operating procedure: investigate, contain, report. 20 seconds, maybe 30 before one of them reached the fire and determined it was natural. Lan moved. She crossed the gap between the tree line and the first bulldozer in 4 seconds flat. No sound. Her bare feet found the packed earth of the camp without disturbing it, weight distributed across toe and ball the way hunters learn to walk before they learn to talk. She reached the Cat 900's flank, located the external fuel cell compartment left side, exactly where Grace's schematics had shown, and opened the access panel with fingers that knew the geometry of mechanical latches, even though the Relang had never built anything more complex than a compound bow. 3 Uraseed pods. She'd harvested them from a grove 2 kilometers south, selecting for size and moisture content pods that would expand in the intake manifold's warm environment, swelling until they blocked the fuel delivery system completely. Natural debris. The most common cause of Cat 900 field failures on Pandora. First pod inserted. The seed disappeared into the manifold's intake channel. In 4 to 6 hours, roughly the time the convoy would reach the ancestral grove's coordinates, the pod would expand, obstruct the fuel cell's hydrogen flow, and trigger a shutdown protocol indistinguishable from standard environmental contamination. Chase moved to the communications vehicle. Smaller, less armored. The roof-mounted array was a single-unit antenna, transmitter, power coupling connected to the vehicle's electrical system through an external junction box. Grace's timing device fit into the junction box's maintenance panel like it was designed for the space, a small electromagnetic pulse generator, timed to activate at 0700, when the convoy would be an hour into transit and out of range of the camp's backup systems. The device wouldn't destroy the array. It would overload the power coupling, forcing a complete system reset that would take the communications offline for 4 to 6 hours. By the time the crew restored function, the check-in window would have passed. Hell's Gate would deploy a response team. The response team would find 3 broken-down bulldozers and a communications blackout. Standard Pandoran operational disaster. His hands shook as he seated the device. Not from fear, from the strange, clean calm of doing something that couldn't be undone. The same feeling he'd had the first time he'd signed a contract at Meridian Energy, committing the company to a delivery timeline that would define the next quarter. Except the stakes weren't quarterly reports. They were 17 graves and the people who mourned them. The device locked into place. The timer display glowed faint green. 4 hours. 4 hours. Through the bond, first target secure. Moving to second. Lan was already at the second bulldozer. She'd covered the 30 meters between machines during Chase's work on the communications vehicle parallel operations, separate targets, the kind of coordinated timing that required either rehearsal or trust. They hadn't rehearsed. Second pod inserted. The access panel closed without sound. 2 down. 2 to go. The guards were still at the fire, one stamping it out, the other sweeping the perimeter with his flashlight. 30 seconds of distraction consumed. Maybe 20 more before they returned to posts. Chase moved to rejoin Lan at the third bulldozer. The camp's portable floods threw long shadows between the machine's corridors of darkness wide enough to move through if you kept low and your body didn't catch the light. His body didn't catch the light. 9 feet of blue skin moving through darkness should have been impossible to hide, but the sanctuary's meditation practiced Lan's breathing technique, syncing his rhythm to the environment, did something to his movement patterns that went beyond physical stealth. The avatar body, already designed for NA6 level jungle navigation, moved with a fluidity that James Chen's muscle memory couldn't have produced. something the system's neural modifications had built, layer by layer, over 4 weeks of continuous adaptation. Third bulldozer. Third pod. Tsay-Lan's hands worked the intake manifold with the economy of motion that separated professionals from amateurs. No wasted gesture, no unnecessary contact, every movement purposeful and minimal. The timer in Chase's visual field counted seconds. The guards' flashlights swept back toward their patrol route. 20 meters. 15. One more bulldozer. The fourth Cat 900, parked closest to the escort vehicle, under the best illumination, with the returning guard's patrol path running directly past its flank. Tsay-Lan assessed. Through proximity, not the bond, but the shared awareness that combat produced between people who moved together. Chase registered her calculation. The timing was wrong. The guards would reach the fourth bulldozer's position before she could open the manifold, insert the pod, and close the panel. Her eyes found his. The question wasn't voiced, abort or adapt. Shadow Fang. Through the bond, Chase reached for the Viper Wolf. 200 meters east, holding position, every predatory instinct coiled and waiting. Distraction. Non-lethal. Eastern perimeter. Now, Shadow Fang didn't howl. He screamed a Viper Wolf's hunting call, the specific vocalization that pack predators used to coordinate kills, pitched at a frequency that triggered primal fear responses in anything with mammalian-adjacent neurology. The sound cut through the camp like a blade through fabric. Every guard turned east. Weapons drawn. Flashlights converging on the tree line where a sound that said apex predator, close, hunting was still echoing off the canopy. Tsay-Lan was at the fourth bulldozer before the echo faded. The fourth intake manifold was jammed. Tsay-Lan's fingers found the access panel latch and pulled. Nothing. The mechanism identical to the other three had seized. Corrosion, maybe. Pandora humidity attacking the cheap alloy the RDA used for non-critical components. A 17% failure rate in the field, Grace had said. Standard operating conditions. Standard operating conditions were working against them. Through the bond, Shadow Fang's distraction holding. The guards had moved to the eastern perimeter, flashlights raking the undergrowth where the Viper Wolf's scream had originated. Shadow Fang was already 200 meters further east, silent, letting the sound's echo do the work. 30 seconds. Maybe 40 before someone decided the threat had passed and returned to patrol. Tsay-Lan pulled harder. The latch deformed under her grip, NA6 finger strength exceeding the alloy's tolerance, but the panel held. She shifted her knife from its sheath, wedged the obsidian edge into the gap between panel and housing. Levered. Metal screamed. Not loud, not compared to Shadow Fang's hunting call or the guards' shouted commands, but in the specific acoustic environment of a military camp in the pre-dawn jungle, where every sound was catalogued against a baseline of expected noise, the shriek of stressed metal was wrong. Foreign. The kind of anomaly that trained security personnel noticed even when they were pointing weapons at something else. A flashlight swung back. Not toward the bulldozer, toward the camp interior. A guard, the one with the mounted weapon's sidearm holstered at his thigh, was scanning the vehicle line with the methodical sweep of someone who'd heard something and couldn't locate it. Chase and Tsay-Lan pressed against the fourth bulldozer's flank. Shadow. Darkness between machines. The guard's flashlight passed over the gap where they'd entered, illuminating empty ground, packed earth, the treads of the adjacent Cat 900. Didn't stop. Passed on. Tsay-Lan's knife had opened the panel during the distraction. The access port gaped, dark, mechanical, the hydrogen fuel cell's intake manifold visible as a cylindrical channel lined with filtration mesh. She inserted the fourth pod. Closed the panel by hand, pressing the deformed latch back into approximate position. It wouldn't pass close inspection, but it didn't need to. By the time maintenance checked fuel systems, the convoy would already be in transit and the pod would already be expanding. 4 targets secure. Through the bond, Grace's confirmation, clipped and professional. Electromagnetic sensor active. Fuel cell signatures nominal shutdown will trigger during transit when thermal expansion activates the pod obstruction. Estimated delay, simultaneous failure at approximately 0900 to 1000. Comms device active. Trigger at 0700. Combined effect, 3 to 4 hours of blackout plus convoy halt. Operational window exceeded. The plan had worked. 4 bulldozers sabotaged. 1 communications array rigged. The timing cascade would produce exactly the result they'd designed. Mechanical failure that looked like Tuesday on Pandora, followed by communications loss that looked like environmental interference, followed by bureaucratic delay that looked like institutional inertia. Get out. Now, before the guards return to normal patrol and the window closes. Tsay-Lan was already moving south, toward the perimeter's weakest point, a section where 2 motion sensors detection cones overlapped at an angle that created a narrow dead zone. She'd mapped it during the approach. Now she flowed through the gap like water through a crack in stone, body contorted to fit the blind spot, bare feet finding ground that the sensors couldn't register. Chase followed. Less graceful, more mass, the avatar body's 9-foot frame requiring compression that the NA6 form handled naturally. He ducked under the lower sensor's cone, twisted past the upper one, felt the electromagnetic field brush his cue like a static charge, close enough that a calibration variance of 2 degrees would have triggered the alarm. Clear. The jungle closed around them. Darkness. Bioluminescence reactivating as their eyes adjusted from the camp's floodlit sterility to the forest's organic twilight. Behind them, the camp, quiet, guards returning to patrol, bulldozers humming at idle with 4 Euro seed pods swelling slowly in 4 intake manifolds. They ran. Not the desperate flight of pursued prey, the controlled sprint of a tactical withdrawal, eating ground in long strides that Tisei Lancet and Chase matched. His breathing held the meditation pattern she taught him, center breath, deep cycle, heartbeat aligned to a rhythm that kept his nervous system from tipping into panic. It worked. The avatar body covered terrain that would have destroyed his human body's endurance, legs carrying him over roots and rocks and stream beds with the mechanical efficiency of a species evolved for exactly this kind of movement. Shadow Fang rejoined them at the half-kilometer mark, emerging from the undergrowth like a shadow gaining substance. Through the bond, satisfaction, the predator's reward signal for a successful hunt. The Viper Wolf fell into formation flanking right, nose working the back trail for pursuit scent, ears rotating for sounds of organized response. Nothing. The camp stayed quiet. The guards had returned to routine. The timer on the communications device counted down in Chase's visual field, red digits ticking towards 0700 with the patience of something that didn't care about the anxiety of the people who'd set it. 1 kilometer from camp. 2. Sainum's extraction route unfolded ahead of them, the path the boy had drawn and redrawn 9 times, every route and rock and water crossing memorized until he could navigate it blindfolded. Chase's feet found the landmarks Sainum had described through the bond, the split boulder at the stream junction, the fallen tree bridging the ravine, the stand of spiral ferns that marked the resource node's outer boundary. They crossed into the Relang ancestral grove's territory at 0345. The node's influence washed over them, the territorial awareness buff activating, the regenerative field's warmth seeping through tired muscles, the hostile detection system confirming no pursuit within range. Safe. Or as safe as people who'd just sabotaged a military convoy could be. Tisei Lan slowed to a walk. Her breathing was controlled, barely elevated from resting rate, the cardiovascular efficiency of a lifelong hunter who treated 3-kilometer tactical sprints as light exercise. She pulled a water pouch from her belt and drank without stopping. Offered it to Chase without looking at him. He took it. The water was warm, mineral-rich, from the sanctuary stream. The same water he'd first tasted on his 3rd day on Pandora, kneeling in a stream that a hexapod had just knocked him into. The flavor was identical. Everything else was different. We did it. 4 bulldozers. 1 array. A 3 to 4 hour window of cascading delays that will push the operation past its authorization period. The ancestral grove survives. For now. Through the bond, Norm's relief, massive and physical, the emotional equivalent of a held breath released after 3 minutes underwater. Grace's controlled satisfaction, the scientist cataloging results, already planning the next data point. Adenite's quiet gratitude, deep as root systems. Sainum's pride fierce, barely contained, the boy who'd mapped the escape route and watched his people run it successfully. And from the ledge above the waterfall, where Tisei Lan would return to her position and her knife and her self-imposed separation from the network, the absence that Chase had learned to read. Not the cold absence of hostility. The warm absence of someone who was there, present, involved, but refusing to let the bond carry what her body already knew. Sector 8 RDA Bulldozer Camp 0347. Private Reyes finished his patrol loop and logged the incident. Brush fire, contained, natural origin. Standard report. Standard night. The Viper Wolf call had spooked him, but the creatures were territorial, not aggressive toward humans in groups. Nocturnal activity, logged and dismissed. He glanced at the bulldozer line. 4 Cat 900S, parked and humming. The 4th one's fuel cell access panel looked off. A slight deformation at the latch point. Probably debris impact during the transit staging. He'd mention it to the maintenance crew. Something moved in his peripheral vision. Not now, earlier. During the Viper Wolf call, when his flashlight had swept the camp interior. A shape between the 2nd and 3rd bulldozers. Tall. Blue. Avatar? Reyes stood at his post, flashlight beam pointed at the ground, and considered what he'd seen. A shape. Maybe. In the dark, during a distraction, with adrenaline flooding his system and shadows doing what shadows always did in Pandora darkness. He didn't log the shape. Logging an unconfirmed avatar sighting near a military convoy would trigger an investigation. Investigations meant querich. Querich meant someone losing their assignment, and Reyes had 4 months left on his contract before rotation home. He logged the brush fire and the Viper Wolf call. Left the shape in the space between memory and doubt, where inconvenient observations went to die. But he didn't forget it. The sanctuary's bioluminescence flared as Chase ducked through the waterfall. Dawnlight filtered through the canopy above, turning the spray into prisms. The grotto's living walls pulsed, welcomed the network, registering its administrator's return with the same adjustment it had made since the first day. Brighter. Warmer. Home. Tisei Lan passed through behind him. She didn't pause at the entrance. Didn't acknowledge the grotto's response. Climbed to her ledge, sheathed her knife, and sat with her back to the wall and her eyes on the approaches. But her hands weren't shaking. Her breathing was steady. And the knife, for the first time since Chase had known her, stayed sheathed without her hand on the hilt. Combat trust. The specific bond that formed between people who'd moved through danger together and come out intact. It didn't require words, or binding, or even acknowledgement. It existed in the body's memory, in the certainty that the person at your flank would be there when the flashlight swept and the shadows deepened, and the only thing between survival and exposure was the speed of the person beside you. Tisei Lan had that certainty now. Her posture said it. Her breathing confirmed it. And the absence of her hand on the knife, that small, profound change in a woman who'd held weapons for 23 years, wrote it in body language that the entire sanctuary could read. Through the bond, Adonite's awareness, the elder noting the shift in Tissalan's bearing with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this development. The old man's faith hadn't wavered since the binding, but his hope, the fragile, practical hope that his people might not just survive but heal, had been contingent on Tissalan. The warrior was the load-bearing wall. If she cracked, everything fell. If she held, everything could grow. She was holding. The timing device triggers in 3 hours. Then the RDA will know something happened to their convoy. The question is whether they'll attribute it to Pandora's standard hostility or to something deliberate. Through the bond, Norm, calculating. If all 4 failures present simultaneously, that raises the probability of deliberate sabotage in the investigation matrix from 12% to 31%. But if they trigger sequentially spread over 30 to 60 minutes of transit, the cascading failure pattern looks like environmental domino effect. Grace's timing is crucial. The pods expand at different rates based on temperature exposure, Grace sent. The first and third bulldozers run hotter than the second and fourth. Staggered failure is the expected pattern. Sequential, not simultaneous. The investigation team will see exactly what they expect, Pandora eating their equipment for the 100th time. The comms device was a different concern. Electromagnetic pulse generators left signatures faint, but detectable if someone knew what to look for. Grace had designed the device to mimic a power coupling failure, the kind of cascading electrical fault that Pandoran electromagnetic interference caused weekly. But if a competent engineer examined the junction box closely, cross that bridge when the convoy stalls. For now, rest, recover, wait for confirmation. Chase sat on the moss carpet. His muscles hummed with residual adrenaline, the avatar body's endocrine system still processing the cocktail of stress hormones that 3 hours of covert operations had pumped into tissues designed for combat speed metabolization. The regenerative field worked on the fatigue, warmth spreading from the moss through his skin into muscle fiber, but the psychological weight of what they'd done sat heavier than any physical strain. He'd sabotaged his employer's equipment, used his cover identity to access intelligence that enabled the disruption of a military operation, deployed an unbound NA6 warrior and a bonded Viper Wolf against personnel who were, technically, his colleagues. In my previous life, this would be corporate espionage. Federal charges. Prison time. Here it's, what? Resistance? Defense? The vocabulary changes but the moral architecture is the same. I broke something that belongs to people who trust me, to protect something they'd destroy without a second thought. The timer counted down. 3 hours and 12 minutes until the communications device activated. 4 to 5 hours until the first fuel cell failure. 6 to 8 hours until the convoy halted completely and someone at Hell's Gate started asking questions. Sainum appeared at the grotto entrance. The boy's face was lit with the specific intensity of someone who'd performed their role and needed to tell someone about it. The extraction route worked, he said. Breathless. Not from exertion, from pride. Every landmark. Every turn. You followed it exactly. You drew it exactly, Chase said. The route saved us. Sainum's bioluminescent markings pulsed bright, the NA6 adolescence equivalent of a blush, visible on skin that communicated emotion through light. He ducked back toward the pool, where his dirt maps waited for their next revision. The sanctuary hummed. The bond carried 6 heartbeats, 7, counting Tissalan's unlinked rhythm, detectable through proximity and the building's acoustic architecture. Dawn broke fully above the canopy, turning the waterfall's spray to gold. 3 hours. Then the consequences began. Norm's hands were too still. That was the tell. In the 3 weeks since his binding, Chase had catalogued Norm Spellman's anxiety signatures through the bond the way a project manager catalogued risk indicators, systematically, dispassionately, and with an accuracy that made genuine friendship feel uncomfortably like surveillance. Norm drummed his fingers when nervous, tapped his feet when processing, fidgeted with his collar when lying. When truly frightened, he went still. The Xenolinguistics lab. Norm sat at his workstation with the RDA's operational communications channel open on a secondary display disguised as a linguistic analysis of military terminology patterns, which was, technically, what it was. He'd been monitoring since 0600. His hands hadn't moved in 4 minutes. Through the bond, compressed data. Norm's intelligence feed flowing in packets that Chase received while sitting in Grace's lab 3 corridors away, running spectral analysis on neural density samples that were genuine research and also the thinnest possible cover for a man whose fingerprints were on sabotage equipment 30 kilometers east. RDA operational channel intercept log. 0703, Sector 8 convoy comms blackout initiated. Communication array non-responsive. Escort vehicle reports power coupling failure. Standard maintenance protocol engaged. 0711, Hell's Gate base acknowledges missed check-in. Response team on standby per protocol. 0847, convoy reports via runner to Sector 8, relay station, 3 of 4 bulldozers experiencing fuel cell failure. 4th operational but unable to proceed without support vehicles. Requesting maintenance deployment. 0903, convoy reports 4th bulldozer fuel cell failure. All 4 machines inoperative. Communications still down. Full operational halt. The cascade had worked exactly as Grace designed it. Sequential failures, staggered across 90 minutes of transit, each one presenting as the environmental contamination that Pandora operating conditions produced weekly. The communications blackout had isolated the convoy during the failure window, preventing real-time reporting that might have revealed the simultaneous nature of the breakdowns. By the time the runner reached the relay station, the story was already written. Pandora ate the equipment. Again. But the 0903 entry wasn't what had frozen Norm's hands. 0908, Colonel Quaritch assumes operational command of Sector 8 investigation. All convoy personnel ordered to preserve evidence. Maintenance crew deployed with forensic capabilities. 0911, Quaritch direct communication, recorded, this wasn't wildlife. 4 simultaneous fuel failures and a comms blackout? Find out who. Quaritch. The name hit the bond like ice water. Not because Chase hadn't expected military attention, the sabotage plan had accounted for investigation as a probable outcome. But the speed of Quaritch's assumption of command 3 minutes after the 4th failure was reported suggested the colonel had been watching Sector 8 operations before the sabotage. Monitoring. Waiting for something to happen in a sector where something had already happened. 4 wounded NA6, a blood trail, and the RDA ammunition that had created both. He's been watching this area since the Relang clearance. The bulldozer operation wasn't just mineral survey preparation, it was Quaritch testing whether hostile activity would manifest in a sector where hostile activity had already occurred. We walked into a trap. Not a physical trap, an intelligence trap. He wanted to see if anyone would interfere with the expansion, and we interfered. Through the bond, Grace's response, transmitted from her quarters where she was ostensibly reviewing sample data. Don't spiral. The sabotage still presents as environmental failure. 4 simultaneous breakdowns are unusual but not unprecedented. I've documented 3 instances in the last decade. The forensic team will find organic debris in the manifolds and a power coupling failure in the comms array. Both are explainable. Quaritch doesn't need proof. He needs suspicion. And he just got it. Then we give him nothing to build on. Normal behavior. Normal schedules. Normal data. He can suspect whatever he wants. Suspicion without evidence is just paranoia, and Selfridge won't authorize escalation based on paranoia. Grace's analysis was correct. Intellectually, Chase knew this. But the bond carried Norm's fear at a frequency that bypassed intellectual processing and plugged directly into the limbic system, and Norm Spellman, hands frozen, breathing shallow, eyes locked on a communications intercept that confirmed the worst-case investigation scenario, was projecting terror at a bandwidth that made rational assessment feel like trying to read a book in a hurricane. Norm. Breathe. Center breath. From the diaphragm. Through the bond, Norm's attempt. Shaky. The xenolinguist who'd never learned T-Celan's meditation techniques trying to apply instructions transmitted telepathically from a man who'd learned them 2 days ago. It worked well enough to restart the finger drumming. Norm's hands found the desk and began tapping in the arrhythmic pattern that meant processing rather than the stillness that meant paralyzed. Better. Keep monitoring. Report anything that changes the threat profile. And close the secondary display if anyone walks past your workstation and sees live operational comms on a linguistics terminal. We're done. The display closed. Norm's primary screen showed NA6 verb conjugation tables. Safe. Ordinary. The kind of work that a xenolinguist performed every day, in a lab that smelled like recycled air and bad coffee, while 3 corridors away his administrator processed intelligence that could end both their lives. Chase set down his spectral analysis stylus. Picked it up. Set it down again. His own anxiety was controlled. The meditation T-Celan had taught him kept his heart rate aligned with the sanctuary's distant rhythm, but the bond's emotional bleed meant that Norm's fear and Grace's cold fury and Atonite's simmering anger all competed for space in his nervous system alongside his own responses. 6 minds sharing a crisis. The emotional load distributes, but it also compounds. I feel everyone's fear plus my own. Managing a network in peacetime is one thing. Managing it during active threat is something the system didn't come with a manual for. Breakfast sat untouched on the bench beside him. The mess hall's protein loaf, still terrible after 28 days, had been collected on autopilot and forgotten. His stomach was a knot. The avatar body's metabolism demanded calories at a rate that ignored psychological state, and the tension between hunger and nausea produced a specific kind of misery that no amount of neural modification could address. He ate. Not because he wanted to. Because the body was a tool, and tools needed maintenance, and a hungry administrator was a compromised administrator. The protein loaf tasted like cardboard and accountability. Through the lab's reinforced windows, Hell's Gate's military wing was active. 2 APC vehicles had deployed toward the Sector 8 relay station at 0830. Response team, standard equipment, not combat deployment. Security personnel moved through corridors with the purposeful stride of people who had been given tasks by someone whose attention they feared. Quaritch's attention. The specific gravity of a colonel who didn't raise his voice when threatening, who planned before striking, who never underestimated opponents after first assessment. Chase knew the character from the film The Implacable Antagonist, the military mind that treated Pandora as a theater of operations and everything in it as either asset or target. In the movie, Quaritch had been two-dimensional, a villain, an obstacle for the hero to overcome. In person, observed through intercepts, through the fear he generated in subordinates, through the institutional weight of his authority, Quaritch was something more dangerous than a villain. He was competent. And now he's investigating a sector where I've built 2 territory nodes, bound 6 citizens, and conducted a sabotage operation that his forensic team is currently dissecting. The morning passed. Lab work. Sample analysis. Reports filed with the precision that Grace's research initiative demanded: real data, real methodology, the institutional cover that made Chase Sinclair's existence at Hell's Gate worth more to the Avatar program than his termination. Every correctly formatted report was a brick in the wall between the sanctuary and Quaritch's attention. At 1430, the investigation update arrived through Norm's channel. Forensic analysis: organic debris, seed pod material, species Pandora vine, found in all 4 intake manifolds. Consistent with environmental contamination during transit through high vegetation corridors. Communications failure attributed to power coupling degradation, water infiltration through compromised seal. Initial assessment: environmental, consistent with Pandora operating conditions. Through the bond, collective exhale. 6 nervous systems releasing tension simultaneously, the network's shared relief manifesting as a warm pulse that the sanctuary's walls registered and echoed. Then the second entry. Quaritch supplementary note, classified, environmental assessment accepted for operational reporting. Personal assessment, pattern warrants continued monitoring. Expand reconnaissance patrols in sectors 7 and 8. Ongoing. The official report said environmental. Quaritch's private note said I don't believe it. Chase stared at the lab bench. The spectral analysis displayed data he couldn't process because his cognitive bandwidth was dedicated to a single calculation. How long before continued monitoring found something that the sabotage's cover story couldn't explain? The ancestral grove. The sanctuary. The bioluminescent structures that didn't occur naturally. The NA6 citizens whose presence in a sector officially devoid of indigenous population was the single most damning piece of evidence in an investigation that had just been classified as ongoing. 3 days, maybe 4, before the expanded patrols reach our territory. Quaritch is methodical. He'll start at the convoy's last position and expand outward in concentric arcs. The grove is 3 kilometers from the staging area. The sanctuary is 6. Through the bond, Grace's voice, carrying the specific temperature of a scientist who'd converted fear into operational planning. We need to know the patrol routes. Timing, composition, equipment. If they're running standard reconnaissance, we can predict their vectors. If Quaritch has modified the protocols, then we adapt. We've adapted before. Before, we weren't on a colonel's radar. The lab door opened. A technician, one of Grace's junior researchers, a woman named Harmon who'd been processing the Sector 7 neural density data for the research initiative, entered with a sample tray and a question about spectral calibration that Chase answered from James Chen's borrowed expertise without conscious thought. The muscle memory of science, performing its role while the mind behind it planned for war. Harmon left. The door closed. The corridor beyond was busy with the midday traffic of people who didn't know that 3 of their colleagues were monitoring a military investigation into sabotage those same colleagues had committed. Chase ate the rest of the protein loaf. Tasted nothing. Filed his afternoon report with perfect formatting and complete data. And in the background of his awareness, like distant thunder before a storm, Quaritch's attention pressed against the edges of the world Chase was building. Grace's day top had hit the lab bench hard enough to crack the display protector. Son of a bitch. She said it quietly, the specific volume she reserved for institutional betrayals, lower than her normal speaking voice, pitched to carry fury without carrying sound beyond the closed lab door. He's routing them through both sectors. The patrol route map glowed on her cracked display. Red lines on topographical green, cutting through sectors 7 and 8 in a systematic grid pattern that left no square kilometer unsurveyed. 6 soldiers per patrol. 2 vehicles. Daily rotations starting day 33 2 days from now. Chase stood at the lab window, watching the military wing's APC bay where 3 vehicles were being prepped for long-range reconnaissance deployment. Not combat vehicles, scout platforms, light armor, sensor arrays. The kind of equipment that found things rather than destroyed them. Finding preceded destroying. Through the bond, Norm's intelligence feed, still flowing from the xenolinguistics lab. The patrol orders were classified but accessible through the operational scheduling database that Avatar program personnel used to avoid active military zones during field work. Quaritch had filed the expanded reconnaissance under environmental threat assessment, a classification that gave the patrols authority to operate in zones normally reserved for scientific research, including Sector 7, including the sanctuary's territory. The route passes within 500 meters of the grotto, Norm sent, and directly through the ancestral grove. Chase closed his eyes. The system's territorial map overlaid his vision: 2 nodes, 2 circles of influence, and a red line cutting through both of them like a surgical incision. When? He asked aloud. Day 33. First patrol deploys at 0800. Estimated arrival at the grove by 1100. Sanctuary approach by 1400. Grace picked up her day top hat. Examined the crack. Set it down more gently. They'll scan everything within 100 meters of the route. Standard issue biosign trackers, electromagnetic field mappers, the same instruments I brought on our expedition. The same instruments that detected the sanctuary from 3 kilometers out. Yes. The word fell between them like a stone into deep water. The sanctuary's bioluminescent structures, the healing pod, the watcher vine, the defensive thorns, the reorganized root network produced electromagnetic signatures that no natural formation could replicate. Grace's instruments had gone haywire the moment they'd entered the sanctuary's influence zone. Military-grade sensors would do the same, and military-grade analysts would not attribute the readings to equipment calibration. Through the bond, the network convened. Not a formal meeting, a convergence of awareness. 6 minds focusing simultaneously on the same crisis, each processing from a different angle. At Knight's perspective, the Grove's ancestors could not be abandoned. Moving the root network was impossible. The dead stayed where the dead were buried, and their protection was a sacred obligation that transcended tactical calculation. T-Saylan's assessment, carried through Sanom's bond awareness: intercept the patrol, ambush, disable their equipment, scatter their formation, make the jungle too dangerous for reconnaissance. She didn't propose killing, she proposed terror. Make Sector 7 so hostile that no patrol wanted to enter it. Sanom's contribution: the escape routes he'd mapped for the sabotage operation could be repurposed as evacuation corridors. If the citizens needed to flee the sanctuary temporarily, he knew 7 paths that avoided RDA vehicle access. Grace's analysis: concealment was possible but imperfect. The healing pod could be deactivated and covered with natural growth. The Watcher vine was already arboreal and indistinguishable from native flora at casual inspection. The defensive thorns were the problem, obviously engineered, visibly non-natural, positioned in patterns that screamed perimeter defense to anyone with military training. Norm's data: the patrol composition was standard reconnaissance. 6 soldiers, none of them scientists. Their biosign trackers would flag anomalous readings, but interpretation required expertise the patrol didn't carry. They'd log the data and move on. Analysis would happen back at base, reviewed by technicians, potentially flagged for follow-up. Chase processed the inputs. 6 perspectives on a crisis that had 2 days to become a catastrophe. Concealment is the only option that doesn't guarantee escalation. T-Saylan's ambush plan works tactically but ensures Quaritch sends a combat team next time. Evacuation abandons the nodes. Direct confrontation is suicide. We hide what we can, Chase said. Grace, can you deactivate the healing pod remotely? Through the bond, yes. The pod's biological systems respond to network commands. I can put it in dormancy, reduces the electromagnetic signature by 80%. The remaining 20% reads as dense root activity, which is consistent with the grotto's natural neural density. The defensive thorns. Grace hesitated. Those are the problem. They're 3 meters tall, organized in geometric patterns, and they bristle when anything approaches. There's no way to make them look natural. Cut them. T-Saylan's voice, carried through Sanom. Remove the thorns before the patrol arrives. Regrow them after. Cutting living defensive structures takes time, Chase said, and regrowth costs SP that we. Then do not cut them. Bury them. T-Saylan again, pragmatic to the edge of brutal. Bend them flat. Cover with soil and leaf litter. They are biological, they will survive being pressed into the ground. When the patrol passes, straighten them. Through the bond, Grace's evaluation. Possible. The defensive thorns root systems were flexible, designed for growth rather than rigidity. Bending them flat was physically feasible. Covering them with natural debris would reduce their electromagnetic signature to background levels. The process would take 6 to 8 hours of manual labor. That works for the Grove, Chase said. The sanctuary is different. The grotto's modifications are internal walls, moss, structures. A patrol that enters the waterfall sees everything. They won't enter. Grace's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd studied military reconnaissance protocols for 15 years. Standard patrol procedure is perimeter observation. They scan from outside, log readings, move on. They don't enter caves, grottos, or enclosed spaces without specific authorization. Too many ways for Pandoran wildlife to turn a cave into a kill box. And if one of them gets curious, then Shadowfang gives them something more interesting to be curious about. The plan crystallized. 2 days of preparation. Deactivate visible structures. Flatten and conceal the defensive thorns. Power down the healing pod. Reduce the sanctuary's electromagnetic output to minimum. Position Shadowfang as a distraction asset, not threatening enough to provoke engagement, interesting enough to redirect attention away from the grotto's entrance. And Chase, T-Saylan, and Sanom would be in the canopy above the patrol route, monitoring, ready to intervene if concealment failed. 2 days. Chase opened his eyes. The lab window showed Hell's Gate's APC bay, where the reconnaissance vehicles waited for their mission like patient predators. Grace, draft a research initiative schedule that puts all 3 of us in Sector 7 on day 33. Legitimate field work. If anyone asks why we're in the area, we're conducting baseline neural density measurements for the monitoring project. Which we are, technically. Grace was already typing. Selfridge approved the initiative. We have standing authorization. Norm stays at base. Communications monitoring. Through the bond, Norm's reluctance, quickly overridden by logic. He was the weakest field operative. His value was intelligence, not stealth. Staying at Hell's Gate with access to the operational database was the correct deployment. I know, Norm sent. I hate it, but I know. At night and the Relang prepare the sanctuary for inspection. Everything that looks engineered gets covered, deactivated, or moved below the waterline. The grotto's natural bioluminescence stays, that's consistent with the sector's known neural density. Everything we've added gets hidden. Through the bond, at night's acknowledgement. The Elder would handle the sanctuary preparation with Sanom's help. He'd buried his life's work once before when the bulldozers came for the Relang homeland and had learned that preservation sometimes required disguise. Tisei Lan handles the grove. Not a question, an assignment. Through Sainum, Chase felt the warrior's response, a nod she didn't give but that her body language committed to. Flattening defensive structures and covering them with debris was physical labor. Tisei Lan's physical labor was measured in results rather than complaints. 48 hours. The countdown began. The engines announced themselves before the vehicles appeared, a low diesel rumble that the jungle's acoustic architecture amplified and distorted, turning 2 scout platforms into a sound wall that silenced every creature within a kilometer radius. Chase lay prone in the canopy, 30 meters above the forest floor, his avatar body pressed against a branch thick enough to support 3 times his weight. The bark's bioluminescent patterns had adjusted to his skin contact, a camouflage response the sanctuary's neural modifications had gifted the territory's flora, matching his blue skin to the branch's pigmentation until he was, from ground level, invisible. Tisei Lan occupied a parallel branch 15 meters to his right. She'd been in position since 0604 hours of absolute stillness that would have driven Chase insane but that the Relang warrior treated as standard operating procedure. Her war paint, freshly applied in patterns designed to break her silhouette against the canopy's fractal geometry, rendered her indistinguishable from the surrounding foliage. If Chase hadn't known exactly where she was through the bond's ambient awareness, he wouldn't have found her. Below them, the Relang ancestral grove. Transformed. The defensive thorns that had bristled along the northern approach 2 days ago were flat against the earth, bent by Tisei Lan's hands and Sainoms, covered in leaf litter and soil that Atonite had blessed before spreading. The root structures hummed faintly beneath their camouflage, alive, dormant, waiting to be raised when the danger passed. The grave markers were unchanged flat stones flush with the earth, carved with symbols that looked like natural rock formation to anyone who didn't know the Relang script. The resource node's electromagnetic signature had been reduced to 30% of its operational output, enough to maintain the territory's passive effects, low enough that military sensors would register it as anomalous but not definitively artificial. Grace's calculation, a 75% chance the readings would be attributed to the sector's documented neural density. A 25% chance someone flagged it for follow-up. 1 in 4. The odds of a coin landing on its edge. Not comfortable, but not catastrophic. Through the bond, Shadow Fang positioned 200 meters east of the grove, in a thicket of spiral fern that provided cover and a clear retreat vector. The Viper Wolf's role was defined and rehearsed. If the patrol's attention drifted toward anything suspicious, Shadow Fang would create a visual distraction. Not aggressive. Curious. A lone Viper Wolf investigating the patrol from safe distance, interesting enough to draw binoculars and scanner attention away from the grove's concealed features. Through the bond, Norm at Hell's Gate, monitoring the patrol's radio frequency. The channel was quiet. The soldiers had checked in at 0800 departure and weren't due for their next transmission until they cleared Sector 8's eastern boundary. Standard procedure. No real-time reporting during transit. Through the bond, Grace at the Sector 7 observation point electromagnetic sensor deployed, monitoring the patrol's scanner output to determine what they were detecting and what they were logging. She'd established a legitimate research station 2 kilometers south of the sanctuary. Real equipment, real data collection, complete cover story. If the patrol encountered her, she was Dr. Grace Augustine conducting authorized neural density monitoring. Nothing to see. Through the bond, at night at the sanctuary, the grotto sealed to minimum output. The elder sat in darkness, bioluminescence dimmed to near extinction, healing pod dormant, watcher vine retracted, chanting prayers that the root network carried to every node in the territory. Not for effect. For faith. The Keeper legend said that Eywa protected what was sacred, and Atonite was reminding the planet what qualified. Through the bond, Sainum beside Atonite, the boy's bone pendant pressed against his forehead, his terror compressed to a manageable frequency by the network's collective resolve. He was 15. He'd already survived 1 invasion. The prospect of a second one, in a place he'd begun to call home, sat on his shoulders with the weight of a history repeating itself. The vehicles appeared at 1047. 2 scout platforms, light armor, open top, fitted with sensor masts that extended 3 meters above the cab. Each vehicle carried 3 soldiers in standard reconnaissance gear, helmets, sidearms, body armor rated for Pandoran wildlife but not military engagement. The lead vehicle's sensor mast rotated in slow sweeps, its electronic eyes mapping the terrain with the systematic indifference of a machine cataloging geography. Chase held his breath. The canopy pressed against his back. 30 meters down, the grove waited beneath its camouflage. 17 graves, 1 dormant node, and the memory of people whose descendants were scattered across this moon's surface in fragments too small for the RDA to notice. The lead vehicle stopped. Not a gradual deceleration, a hard stop, the kind that threw the passenger forward against his harness. The driver killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, the jungle's ambient noise flooded back, insect clicks, distant water, the ventilation hum of the second vehicle idling behind. A soldier climbed out. Tall, young, moving with the specific combination of boredom and training that reconnaissance patrols produced. He held a portable scanner, palm-sized, multi-spectrum, the same model Chase had seen in Grace's equipment logs. He swept it toward the tree line. Through Grace's remote sensor, the soldier's scanner was detecting elevated biosign activity. Neural density readings consistent with the sector's documented profile, but concentrated in a pattern that suggested organized biological architecture rather than random growth. The scanner's display would show a heat map of neural activity, warmer at the grove's center, cooler at the edges with a gradient that resembled, to trained eyes, a node. The soldier frowned, tapped the scanner's screen, adjusted parameters, swept again. Chase's fingers pressed into the bark, blue knuckles white at the edges. Through the bond, Norm's frantic monitoring. His scanner's pinging elevated readings. He's recalibrating. If he switches to electromagnetic mapping, I see it. Grace's response was clinical. The neural density readings are within documented parameters for the sector. He's seeing what the survey data already shows: high activity, unusual concentration. If he's not a neural specialist, he won't know the difference between natural and artificial. And if he is, then we have a problem. The soldier wasn't a neural specialist. His frown was the expression of a man encountering data outside his expertise, trying to determine whether it warranted attention or filing. He checked his mission parameters. Chase could see the movement of his eyes, tracking text on the scanner's display. Neural density readings above threshold required logging but not investigation. The patrol's mandate was reconnaissance, not analysis. He logged the reading, climbed back into the vehicle. Chase's lungs remembered how to work. The patrol advanced. Slowly, 5 kilometers per hour, the pace of vehicles in dense terrain. The second vehicle's sensor mast swept the grove's western edge, its electronic gaze passing over the concealed defensive thorns with the brief indifference of a system processing environmental data against a baseline that classified everything below threshold as unremarkable. The grove's camouflage held. The flat thorns, buried under Tissaland's leaf litter, produced no signature the sensors could distinguish from the dense root systems surrounding them. The dormant node's reduced output registered as background neural activity elevated, but consistent with the documented anomalies that had made Sector 7 interesting to researchers long before Chase arrived. The patrol cleared the grove at 1103. 16 minutes. 16 minutes of absolute silence and held breath and the specific terror of watching people with instruments search for something you've hidden in plain sight. They continued northwest, toward Sector 7 proper, toward the sanctuary. Chase and Tissaland descended from the canopy, simultaneous drops, practiced during 2 days of preparation, landing on the grove's forest floor without sound. Tissaland was already moving north, following the patrol's vehicle trail at a parallel distance of 200 meters. Her feet found the ground the way they always did, silent, sure, the inherited precision of a hunter whose survival depended on moving through space without disturbing it. Chase followed. The avatar body kept pace with effort that Tissaland made look effortless. 28 days of system-modified neural development had improved his coordination enormously. He no longer tripped over roots or startled hexapodes, but the gap between an avatar driver who'd been learning for a month and a warrior who'd been moving through this jungle since birth was a chasm that no amount of modification could bridge in so short a time. Through the bond, Grace tracking the patrol's electromagnetic output from her observation point. They're following the route exactly as filed. No deviations. Estimated arrival at sanctuary perimeter, 53 minutes. Sanctuary status, dormant. Adenite has the grotto at 12% output. Even military sensors shouldn't detect organized patterns at that level. It reads as dense natural bioluminescence. Should. Science doesn't deal in certainties, Chase. It deals in probabilities. And the probability is in our favor. 75%. 3 chances in 4. Better odds than the sabotage had offered, better odds than following a blood trail into unknown jungle, better odds than standing in the grotto on day 5 while Eywa's planetary consciousness decided whether to quarantine or delete him. But probabilities were cold comfort when the consequences of the 25% scenario included everything he'd built being discovered, dissected, and destroyed by a military apparatus that classified alien consciousness as a resource extraction variable. The patrol vehicles rumbled through the jungle ahead, 2 kilometers from the sanctuary. Closing. Through the bond, Shadowfang repositioned. The Viper Wolf had tracked the patrol through territorial awareness, maintaining the 200-meter standoff distance that balanced visibility with safety. His neural filaments glowed in anticipation patterns, not combat, not fear. The focused energy of a predator waiting for a signal to perform. Not yet, Chase sent. Hold position. Distraction only if they approach the grotto entrance. Shadowfang acknowledged, understood, waiting. Pack sense active. 1 kilometer. The sensor mast swept the canopy, painting electromagnetic portraits of a forest that was trying very hard to look ordinary. Chase matched Tissaland's pace through the undergrowth, both of them ghosts in a jungle that didn't want to be found. Through the bond, 6 heartbeats accelerating. The sanctuary approaching its test. The network holding its breath. The patrol's lead vehicle crested the ridge above the waterfall. From their vantage point, the soldiers could see the stream that fed the grotto, the rock formation that concealed its entrance, and the waterfall itself, a 2-meter curtain of water that looked, from the outside, like exactly what it was. A waterfall. Nothing more. The driver slowed, not stopping, reducing speed for terrain assessment. Standard procedure. The route's filed coordinates passed within 500 meters of the grotto, and the patrol was following the route with the mechanical precision of soldiers who wanted to complete their assignment and return to base before the afternoon rain. The sensor mast swept. Left to right. Electromagnetic mapping of the area surrounding the waterfall. The scanner processed the data: neural density, biosign activity, chemical composition of the air, thermal signatures. Through Grace's sensor, the readings were elevated, consistent with documented Sector 7 anomalies. The grotto's 12% output registered as a concentration of natural bioluminescence in a geothermally active zone. Nothing that contradicted the sector's existing survey data. Nothing that required investigation. A soldier in the rear seat leaned forward, tapped the driver's shoulder, pointed toward the waterfall. Chase's blood stopped moving. The soldier was looking at the bioluminescence. Not the waterfall, the pattern. The faint glow visible through the water's curtain, where the grotto's root network cast organized light against the stone walls behind the cascade. From a distance, it was beautiful, decorative, the kind of natural phenomenon that Pandora produced with casual abundance. But the pattern was too regular, too geometric. The hexagonal display arrays that the sanctuary used for status monitoring, dimmed to 12%, still carried structural organization that natural bioluminescence didn't produce. And this soldier, young, observant, the kind of recruit who noticed details because noticing details was the only talent that distinguished him from the other 5 million people who'd applied for a Pandora deployment, was looking at the pattern with an expression that said, "That's interesting." He reached for his communicator. Shadow Fang howled. Not the hunting scream of the sabotage night, a territorial call, the Viper Wolf's claim broadcast that told every creature within 3 kilometers that this ground belonged to an apex predator who wasn't interested in sharing. The sound hit the patrol like a physical force, soldiers reaching for sidearms, the driver killing the engine, the sensor mast swinging east toward the source. The observant soldier's hand dropped from his communicator. His head turned. His eyes left the waterfall's pattern and tracked the sound the way training demanded: assess threat, determine distance, evaluate engagement protocol. Shadow Fang emerged from the fern thicket 200 meters east. Visible, deliberate, a lone Viper wolf, scarred across the muzzle, standing at the edge of the patrol's scanner range with the casual confidence of a predator on home ground. He didn't approach, didn't retreat, just stood, neural filaments glowing amber, tail low, watching the humans with the measured interest of something, deciding whether they were worth the energy. The patrol's training kicked in. Viper wolf sighting, log, assess, do not engage unless provoked. 6 pairs of binoculars tracked the animal. 6 scanner readings confirmed, single Viper wolf, adult male, non-aggressive posture. No pack activity detected. Log it. The patrol leader's voice carried across the distance, amplified by the canyon acoustics, clear enough for Chase's avatar hearing to catch every word. Single hostile, bearing 090, distance 200. Standard territorial display. No engagement required. The soldier who'd been looking at the waterfall lowered his binoculars, picked up his scanner, logged the Viper wolf sighting with the perfunctory attention of a man whose interesting observation had been interrupted by a more immediate one. The patrol moved on. Engine restarting. Sensor mast resuming its sweep. The vehicles rolled past the waterfall at 5 kilometers per hour, covering the 500 meters of closest approach in 6 minutes of mechanical indifference. 6 minutes. 360 seconds during which the sanctuary's existence balanced on whether a young soldier's curiosity could survive the disruption of a well-timed predator. The patrol cleared the sanctuary's perimeter at 1417. Continued northwest. Their radio crackled a check-in, positions confirmed, readings logged. Standard reconnaissance. Nothing found. Through the bond, Grace's electromagnetic sensor registered the patrol's scanner output as it moved out of range. The data they'd collected was clean, elevated neural density, standard bioluminescence, 1 Viper wolf sighting. Nothing that would generate a follow-up investigation. Nothing that would bring Quaritch's analytical attention to a waterfall that hid the most significant biological discovery in human history. Through the bond, 6 held breaths, releasing simultaneously. The sanctuary's bioluminescence brightened at night, restoring output, the grotto emerging from its hibernation like a creature surfacing from deep water. The healing pod reactivated. The Watcher Vine extended its surveillance tendrils. The living architecture of the sanctuary resumed its normal rhythms, and the network's citizens felt the restoration like warmth returning after a long cold. Chase and Lan remained in the canopy until the patrol's engine sounds faded to nothing. Then silence. Jungle sounds rebuilding from the disruption, clicks, calls, the underwater hum of a world recovering from the passage of something mechanical through its organic circuits. Lan dropped from her branch, landed, looked up at Chase with an expression that the afternoon light rendered in sharp detail, relief compressed behind warrior's discipline, the specific set of her jaw that meant, "We survived, but I'm not celebrating." The soldier, the one who was looking, her voice was flat. He saw something. Shadow Fang distracted him. This time, she sheathed the knife she'd been holding since the patrol appeared, blade drawn without conscious decision, combat ready throughout the 6-minute window. He will think about what he saw, at his post, in his quarters, in the quiet moments when the mind replays what the body noticed. He will remember the pattern in the waterfall. Maybe, definitely. Lan's certainty was the certainty of someone who'd watched the RDA's methodology for years, the slow accumulation of data points, the gradual construction of awareness from individual observations, the institutional patience that turned curious soldiers into intelligence assets. One observation does not trigger an investigation, but one observation plus one suspicion plus one report becomes a pattern. Yes, they stood in the jungle between the grove and the sanctuary, 2 people carrying the weight of a near miss that felt heavier than a direct hit. The patrol was gone. The territory was intact. The cover had held. But somewhere in the RDA's reconnaissance database, a young soldier's scanner data was being uploaded for analysis. And somewhere in that data, buried in the noise of environmental readings and Viper Wolf sightings, was a neural density reading from a waterfall that shouldn't have shown organized patterns. A reading that, on its own, meant nothing, but added to a colonel's private assessment that this wasn't wildlife, added to an investigation that had been classified as ongoing, might become the first stitch in a thread that led from a disabled convoy to a hidden grotto to a network that the RDA's best minds would never have predicted. Through the bond, the network hummed with survival's aftermath. Adonite's gratitude. Sanom's relief. Shadowfang's pride, the alpha who'd performed his role and earned pack approval. Grace's analytical satisfaction, already planning improvements to the concealment protocol. Norm's shaking hands, finally moving again. And Lan, walking beside Chase toward the sanctuary, knife sheathed, back straight, carrying the specific weight of a woman who'd protected her ancestors' graves twice in 1 month and knew with the bone-deep certainty of someone who'd lost everything once that twice wouldn't be enough. The patrol route would run again. Tomorrow. The day after. Weekly, until Quaritch decided the sector was clear or until he found what he was looking for. The sanctuary needed to be ready for both outcomes. The Watcher Vine screamed. Not sound signal. A cascade of alert pulses through the network's surveillance architecture, the biological equivalent of a proximity alarm triggered by movement at the sanctuary's southeastern boundary. Chase was halfway through the waterfall, Lan 2 steps behind him, when the data hit his awareness through the territorial buff with the force of a klaxon. Hostile detection alert. 6 human signatures, 2 vehicles returning on southeast vector. Distance, 400 meters and closing. Note, same patrol. Return leg. Altered approach angle. The patrol hadn't left. They'd completed their outbound route and circled back, standard reconnaissance procedure, covering the return leg on a different vector to survey terrain they'd passed from only one angle. The first pass had taken them northwest along the ridge above the waterfall. The return brought them southeast, through the lower terrain where the stream fed into the grotto, along an approach that brought them within 200 meters of the sanctuary's entrance. An approach angle the concealment protocol hadn't prioritized. Through the bond, Adonite's alarm, the Elder already moving to reduce the grotto's output further. Sanom's fear, a bright spike that the boy compressed with effort, his hands finding the bone pendant the way they always did when the world pressed too hard. Grace at Hell's Gate, her electromagnetic sensor registering the patrol's scanner output as it swept the southeastern corridor. They're coming from below the waterfall. The terrain puts them at eye level with the entrance. Chase, the concealment covers the interior but the entrance's root structures are visible from that angle. I know. The root structures. The sanctuary's biological architecture had grown outward from the grotto over 4 weeks, subtle modifications to the waterfall's surrounding rock, root tendrils extending through the stone to create the defensive and surveillance infrastructure that kept the territory functional. From above, from the ridge where the first pass had traveled, the modifications blended with the waterfall's natural rock face. From below, at stream level, the root structures were visible as organized patterns on the stone, too regular, too geometric, the fingerprints of biological engineering pressed into a surface that should have been bare. Chase spun back through the waterfall. The jungle pressed in from every direction, canopy overhead, undergrowth at his flanks, the stream cutting a silver channel through terrain that was about to become a stage. Lan, they're coming back. She was already gone. Vanished into the canopy above the grotto entrance, finding the ledge she'd occupied during the first pass with the fluid automaticity of a warrior who kept escape routes memorized the way other people kept addresses. Her knife was out. Her war paint, still fresh from the morning's application, broke her silhouette against the foliage. Through the bond, Shadowfang. Position? The Viper Wolf responded with location data 300 meters east, returning from the distraction run that had drawn the patrol's attention on the first pass. Too far. The patrol would reach visual range of the entrance before the wolf could reposition. The engine sounds grew. Not the distant rumble of the first approach, closer, sharper, the acoustic profile of vehicles moving through the stream channel at reduced speed. Scanning. The sensor masts rotated in lazy arcs, painting the terrain with electromagnetic attention. Distance, 200 meters. Chase ducked behind a root buttress at the waterfall's base. The water cascaded beside him, warm spray misting his skin. From this position, he could see the approach channel, a natural corridor carved by the stream, wide enough for vehicles, lined with bioluminescent undergrowth that the sanctuary's influence had made brighter and more organized than the surrounding forest. More organized. The key problem. The sanctuary's territory didn't just protect its inhabitants, it improved the surrounding ecology, and that improvement was visible. The plants within the 5-kilometer radius grew denser, healthier, more luminous than plants outside it. The transition was gradual enough that a casual observer wouldn't notice. A sensor mast calibrated for neural density mapping would see it like a spotlight. The lead vehicle appeared around a bend in the stream channel, moving slow 3 kilometers per hour. The sensor operator in the passenger seat was leaned forward, display tilted toward him, frowning at readings that had jumped when they'd entered the sanctuary's outer boundary. Scanners spiking? The words carried across the water. Clear. Human. The voice of a man doing his job. Neural density up 40% from the ridge readings. Something's concentrating the biosignatures. The driver stopped. Engine idling. The second vehicle pulled alongside. 6 soldiers, the same 6 from the first pass, still carrying the data that showed this sector's anomalous readings within documented parameters. But the return pass was showing something different. The southeastern approach put them inside the sanctuary's influence zone at a depth the ridge route hadn't reached, and the difference between natural density and node-enhanced density was, from this distance, undeniable. Dismount. Close inspection. Mark the coordinates. 4 soldiers climbed out. Weapons at ready, not aimed, but accessible. They spread into a search formation, 2 flanking the stream, 2 advancing through the undergrowth on either side. Standard close-terrain investigation. Thorough. Methodical. One of them reached the waterfall's base, looked up at the rock face, and stopped. The root structures were visible. Organized tendrils extending through the stone in patterns that the sanctuary's biological architecture had grown over 4 weeks of continuous development. Surveillance conduits, structural reinforcement, nutrient channels. From above, they'd looked like natural rock veins. From below, at arm's length, in the sensor-enhanced vision of a soldier trained to identify anomalous features, they looked like exactly what they were. Infrastructure. Command, this is Patrol 7. The soldier's hand went to his communicator. We've found something. Some kind of structure, biological origin, integrated with the rock formation at these coordinates. Signs of organized growth. Request immediate. Static. The communicator hissed not the clean static of signal loss, but a modulated interference that carried undertones of biological frequency. The same frequency the sanctuary's root network operated on. The same electromagnetic signature that Eywa's distributed consciousness used to communicate across the planetary neural architecture. The radio was being jammed. Not by Chase, he had no ability that affected electromagnetic communication. Not by any system function he'd activated or blueprint he'd deployed. Something else. Something in the network's deeper architecture, responding autonomously to a threat the administrator hadn't ordered it to address. Eywa, she's protecting the node. The planetary consciousness is interfering with the patrol's communications because the sanctuary is part of her network, and the network protects itself. The soldier tapped his communicator. Adjusted frequency. Tried again. Static on every channel. Comms are down. He looked at the Sergeant Briggs, the patrol leader, standing in the stream with water around his ankles and his sidearm resting on his hip. Same interference pattern as the convoy blackout. Briggs' expression changed. The convoy blackout. The bulldozer sabotage. The investigation that Quaritch had classified as ongoing. The connection formed in real time behind the sergeant's eyes. 2 incidents of communication failure in the same sector, weeks apart, centered on locations with anomalous bioreadings. Pull back. Everyone back to vehicles. We're. Adonite stepped from the grotto entrance. The elder moved through the waterfall's curtain with the unhurried grace of someone who'd decided that hiding was finished. His staff was in his right hand. His white hair, wet from the spray, caught the bioluminescence and threw it back in patterns that the soldier's sensor equipment registered as organized neural activity concentrated in a humanoid form. 6 weapons came up. Don't. Chase stepped from behind the root buttress. Hands raised. Empty. 9 feet of blue-skinned avatar body, visible, undeniable, standing between 6 armed soldiers and an elderly NA6 who'd decided that Eywa's keeper shouldn't face discovery alone. Through the undergrowth, movement. Sainum, emerging from the tree lean at the patrol's eastern flank. The boy carried his spear too big for him, always too big, and his bioluminescent markings pulsed in the rapid stress patterns that the soldier's biosign trackers would identify as a 15-year-old NA6 in a state of controlled terror. And above, on the ledge, Tsay-Lan. Visible now, deliberately visible, standing at the waterfall's crest with her knife catching the light. Not a threat display, a statement. We are here. We were always here. Now you see us. 6 weapons. 4 figures, 1 avatar, 3 NA6. The waterfall pouring between them like a curtain between worlds. My name is James Chen. Chase's voice carried over the water. The name tasted wrong. A costume he'd been wearing for 33 days, peeling at the edges, the glue dissolving under the weight of everything it covered. I'm an avatar driver with the Xenobiology Research Division, and I think we need to talk about what happens next. Briggs' weapon didn't waver, but his eyes moved from Chase to Adonite to Sainum to the knife-wielding silhouette above the waterfall. A sergeant doing threat calculus, 4 hostiles, no firearms visible, unknown capabilities, comms jammed. His training said contain, assess, report. The jammed radio made reporting impossible. On your knees. Briggs' voice was professional. Controlled. The tone of a man following procedure because procedure was the only thing that worked when reality stopped making sense. All of you. Knees. Hands where I can see them. Chase didn't kneel. Didn't move. Through the bond, he felt Tsay-Lan's muscles coil, the warrior reading the situation as pre-combat, every instinct screaming for the intervention that her knife hand ached to deliver. Not yet. Hold. The young soldier on the eastern flank, the same one who'd noticed the bioluminescence pattern on the first pass, had his weapon pointed at Sainum. His hands were shaking. 19, maybe 20. The same age as Sainum, measured in different years, wearing a different skin, holding a tool designed to end the other's existence from a safe distance. Chase looked at the fear in that young soldier's eyes and saw something he recognized. Not malice. Not hatred. The terror of a person who'd signed up for a job and stumbled into something impossible, and whose training offered no framework for the moment when the impossible stared back. Nobody needs to die here, Chase said. Lower the weapons. I'll explain everything. Briggs' finger rested on the trigger guard. Not the trigger, the guard. The millimeter distinction between trained discipline and catastrophic impulse. On your knees, Chen. No. The word dropped into the stream channel like a stone into deep water. 6 soldiers. 4 defenders. 1 waterfall. And a refusal that committed everyone present to whatever came next. The accidental discharge came from the eastern flank. Not a conscious decision, a tremor. The young soldier whose hands hadn't stopped shaking since the NA6 emerged from the tree lean, whose weapon was pointed at a 15-year-old boy holding a spear too big for his frame, whose finger had migrated from the trigger guard to the trigger in the specific neural pathway that fear carved through trained behavior. The round hit the rock face 3 meters above Sainum's head. Stone fragments sprayed. The sound of flat, percussive crack that the jungle's acoustics amplified into a thunderclap shattered every remaining pretension of controlled standoff. The second round hit Sainum. Not center mass a graze, the bullet's trajectory deflected by the boy's instinctive dodge, catching the outside of his left arm above the elbow. A 3-centimeter furrow through skin and muscle, bleeding immediately, the dark blue hemolymph vivid against blue skin. Through the bond, Sainum's pain. Sharp, bright, a frequency that cut through the network's emotional architecture and hit every citizen simultaneously. Chase's arm burned in sympathetic response. Adonite staggered. At Hell's Gate, Norm's hand flew to his bicep, phantom injury manifesting through the bond's sensory bleed. And Tisei-lan dropped from the ledge. Not the controlled descent of the sabotage knight. A kill drop. 3 meters of free fall, knife extended, body angled toward the soldier who'd shot her clan member. Trajectory calculated in the fraction of a second between the gunshot and the gravity's claim, a computation that was less thought than instinct, less decision than biological imperative. Hold fire. Briggs screamed the words into a situation that had already left the domain of verbal command. 2 more soldiers pivoted toward Tisei-lan. 1 fired. The round went wide, the shooter compensating for the NA6's speed and undercompensating badly, the bullet burying itself in a tree trunk 2 meters behind her descent path. Tisei-lan hit the ground between the young soldier and Sainum. Her knife found the weapon, not the hand, the weapon slapping the barrel sideways with the flat of the blade, a disarm technique designed for creatures with reflexes faster than human soldiers could track. The gun left the boy's hands. He stumbled backward, fell, splashed into the stream. Chase moved. Not toward the soldiers, toward Briggs. The avatar body's 9-foot frame covered the distance in 2 strides, placing him between the sergeant's weapon and the chaos behind. A wall of blue between order and collapse. Stop. Not Chase's normal voice. Something deeper, the subharmonic register that Pandora fauna used for territorial dominance, a sound the avatar body produced when the system's neural modifications engaged vocal musculature that human drivers never accessed. The frequency hit the soldier's nervous systems at a level below conscious processing, triggering the freeze response that evolution had built into every organism that heard an apex predator's command. 3 soldiers froze. Briggs froze. The soldier who'd fired at Tisei-lan froze with his weapon half raised, the barrel pointed at a space Tisei-lan had already vacated. The young soldier sat in the stream, weaponless, wet, crying. Sainum pressed his hand against his bleeding arm. Adonite was at his side, the elder's hands finding the wound with practiced speed, torn fabric from his own clothing becoming a compress before the blood could drip onto the moss. Through the bond, Sainum's pain transmitting at full bandwidth. The boy was conscious, alert, frightened, but the wound was superficial, the graze hadn't hit bone or major vessels. The healing pod could close it in hours. If they survived the next 60 seconds. Tisei-lan stood between the disarmed soldier and the rest of the patrol. Her knife was blood-free, she hadn't cut anyone, only disarmed, but her posture broadcast killing intent so clearly that 3 trained soldiers with firearms couldn't bring themselves to move. Everyone stop. Chase's hands were still raised. The subharmonic command had bought seconds, not minutes. Once the freeze response faded, 6 soldiers would be 6 decision makers, and not all of those decisions would be professional. Weapons down. Nobody else gets hurt. You're harboring unauthorized NA6. Briggs found his voice. The freeze was breaking. In a restricted sector. With structures that. I know. And I'll explain. But right now, your soldier shot a child, and if you don't get your people under control, the woman with the knife is going to make decisions that none of us can walk back. Briggs looked at Tisei-lan. The warrior's yellow eyes met his with the flat disinterest of a predator assessing whether prey was worth the energy. Her knife hand was steady. Her breathing was calm. She'd moved from ledge to ground to disarm in under 3 seconds, and nothing about her posture suggested she'd reached her limit. Lower weapons. Briggs' voice cracked on the second word. He compensated by repeating it. Lower weapons. Everyone. Now. 3 soldiers complied. The fourth, the one who'd fired at Tisei-lan, kept his weapon raised, barrel tracking between the NA6 warrior and the wounded boy behind her. Private Reyes. Briggs' tone shifted to command mode. Lower. Your weapon. Reyes. The name hit Chase like a physical blow. Private Reyes. The guard from the bulldozer camp. The one who'd seen a shape between the vehicles during the sabotage and chosen not to log it. The same young soldier who was now standing in a stream with his weapon pointed at the people whose existence confirmed the suspicion he'd suppressed 3 weeks ago. Reyes' eyes found Chase. Recognition not of the person, but of the category. Tall, blue, moving like a hunter. The description he'd given himself in the dark of the bulldozer camp, the observation he'd buried in the space between memory and doubt. It was you. Rhea's voice was barely audible over the waterfall. At the camp, the shape I saw. Silence. The stream ran. The waterfall poured. The jungle held its breath. Lower your weapon, Reyes. Chase spoke the name deliberately. A person, not a rank. A 19-year-old kid who'd traveled 6 years through space to earn enough money to go home, and was now standing ankle-deep in alien water pointing a gun at the confirmation of something he'd tried to forget. Reyes' weapon dropped. Not lowered, dropped. The gun hit the stream with a splash. His hands came up, empty, and his face crumpled into the specific expression of a person whose world had just exceeded its load-bearing capacity. The standoff dissolved. Not resolved, dissolved. Soldiers standing in water with lowered weapons. NA6 standing on moss with bleeding wounds and unsheathed knives. An avatar driver between them, hands still raised, heart hammering at a rate that the sanctuary's territorial awareness buff was trying and failing to moderate. Through the bond, norm, status. Their comms are still jammed. Whatever's doing it hasn't stopped. You have a window, but I don't know how long. Grace? Monitoring. The electromagnetic interference pattern is originating from the root network itself. It's not a system ability, it's Eywa. She's protecting the node autonomously. I've never seen this before. Eywa, the planetary consciousness, acting without Chase's authorization to jam military communications in defense of a sanctuary node. Not because he'd ordered it. Because the sanctuary was part of her network, and the network's self-preservation instincts operated at a level the administrator didn't control. She's protecting me. Or she's protecting herself. Either way, the comms won't stay jammed forever. When they clear, Quaritch hears everything. Chase looked at 6 soldiers. 4 standing. 1 in the stream. 1 Reyes on his knees in the water with his empty hands raised and his weapon sinking into the silt. Nobody dies today, Chase said. Sit down. All of you. I'm going to explain what this place is, and then we're going to figure out how everyone walks away. Briggs stared at him. The sergeant's training ward with his survival instinct protocol demanded detention, restraint, reporting. But protocol also demanded communications, and the jammed radio in his hand was a dead weight. He was cut off. In hostile territory. With NA6 warriors who moved faster than his soldiers could aim and a viper wolf howling somewhere in the perimeter. He sat. One by one, the others followed. 6 soldiers, seated in the stream or on the mossy bank. Weapons holstered or grounded. The posture of people who'd run out of options that included standing up. Chase lowered his hands. Tsaylan's knife stayed out, pointed down, not sheathed. The warrior's compromise between compliance and readiness. Sainum's arm had stopped bleeding. Adnight's compress held, the elder's hands steady on a wound that the sanctuary's regenerative field was already addressing through proximity healing. The boy's face was tight with pain, but his eyes were clear. Present. The Relang youth who'd drawn extraction maps in the dirt and lit distraction fires and navigated his people through sabotage operations was not going to pass out from a graze. Start talking. Briggs' voice had flattened. Professional mode. Whatever the explanation, he'd evaluate it as intelligence rather than conversation. Chase took a breath. Center breath. Diaphragm. The rhythm Tsaylan had taught him in the sanctuary's darkness 2 nights and a lifetime ago. And he started to talk. The explanation took 12 minutes. Chase timed it not deliberately, but the system's interface counted seconds with the indifferent precision of a tool that didn't care about the content of the crisis it was clocking. He told them what they could see, biological structures grown by the planet's root network, concentrated at this location due to naturally elevated neural density. NA6 survivors, refugees from an RDA clearance operation in Sector 8, sheltered here because the alternative was dying in the jungle. An avatar driver who'd discovered the site during authorized research and made a choice to protect people rather than report them. He didn't tell them about the system, the interface, the binding, the administrator access. Those were layers of truth that 6 soldiers sitting in a stream with jammed radios and a wounded colleague wouldn't process, and that Chase's cover couldn't survive revealing. The partial truth sat in the air between them. Incomplete. Sufficient. Briggs listened with the focused attention of a career NCO cataloging intelligence facts, implications, exploitable weaknesses. His expression didn't change throughout the 12 minutes. When Chase finished, the sergeant looked at Adonite, at Sainum's bandaged arm, at Tsaylan's knife, and at the waterfall behind which structures that shouldn't exist pulsed with living light. Unauthorized contact with indigenous population. Briggs spoke like a man reading charges. Unauthorized construction in a restricted sector. Obstruction of authorized military operations. Aiding and abetting unauthorized presence of non-human nationals in a human-designated zone. He paused. That's before we get to whatever jammed our communications. The communications interference is environmental, Chase said. The lie was small and necessary. Electromagnetic anomalies in this sector have been documented for years. Grace Augustine's research initiative exists specifically to study them. And the structures. Biological. Natural. Concentrated neural growth in response to the site's unique conditions. Each word was a brick in a wall that Chase built between these soldiers and the truth. The NA6 didn't build them. The planet did. We're studying them. With NA6 refugees living inside them. People live where it's safe. The structures provide shelter. The research provides cover. Nobody planned this, it happened because the alternative was worse. Briggs processed. Through the bond, Chase couldn't read the sergeant. Unbound minds were opaque, their emotional states accessible only through body language and vocal tone. But Chase had spent 7 years reading rooms at Meridian Energy, parsing the body language of investors and executives and board members who held his project's funding in their expressions. Briggs wasn't angry. He was calculating. The other soldiers were easier to read. 2 veterans, mid-30s, the patrol's flankers watched Lan with the specific wariness of men who'd fought NA6 speed opponents in training exercises and lost. 1 The driver, heavy-set, older, stared at the sanctuary entrance with the slack-jawed expression of someone experiencing Pandora's strangeness for the first time despite years of deployment. 1 A woman, corporal's insignia, quiet throughout, tracked the conversation with analytical focus. And Reyes, the private, sat in the stream with his weapon at the bottom of the current and his empty hands in his lap. He hadn't spoken since his recognition. It was you, and his face carried the expression of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed in the worst possible way. Quaritch will find out. Briggs said it as fact, not threat. We report in every 90 minutes. Miss 2 and a response team deploys. That gives you. He checked his watch. An hour and 40 minutes before this sector fills with soldiers who are better armed and less patient than us. Through the bond, Norm. How long can Eywa maintain the jamming? A pause. Grace's analysis flowed through. The interference pattern is degrading. The root network's electromagnetic output is at maximum sustainable capacity. I estimate 30 to 45 minutes before the signal drops below jamming threshold and their communicators restore function. 30 to 45 minutes. Less than Briggs' 90-minute window. When the jamming failed, 1 radio call would bring Quaritch's response to the sanctuary's doorstep. I'm going to make you an offer, Chase said. And I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. Briggs raised an eyebrow. The gesture was almost amused, a sergeant who'd heard 1,000 field negotiations from people who had less leverage than they thought. The RDA is conducting mineral surveys in this sector. The orbital data flagged deposits in Sector 8, which triggered the bulldozer operation your investigation is studying. Chase chose words carefully. Each one measured for its impact on 6 different listeners. I have information about deposit locations in adjacent sectors. Data the orbital survey missed because the mineral signatures are masked by the root network's electromagnetic field. A beat. Briggs' expression shifted, not dramatically, but the eyebrow descended and the calculation behind his eyes recalibrated. You're offering mineral coordinates. I'm offering value. The RDA is here for resources. I can provide intelligence about resources the standard survey can't detect. In exchange, your patrol reports exactly what the outbound pass recorded, elevated bioreadings consistent with documented sector anomalies. Nothing else. You're asking us to file a false report. I'm asking you to file an incomplete report. You did find elevated readings. You did document biosignatures. You just don't mention the part that's currently sitting in a stream pointing weapons at people who were minding their own business. The proposal hung in the air. Chase knew it was weak bribery dressed as intelligence exchange, dependent on soldiers choosing institutional disloyalty over career preservation. Briggs would see through it in seconds. Briggs saw through it in 3. Quaritch would smell the lie. The sergeant's voice was flat, certain. The assessment of a man who'd served under the colonel long enough to know that incomplete reports in sectors under active investigation were exactly the kind of anomaly Quaritch was calibrated to detect. He's reviewing every patrol data packet personally. Any deviation from expected readings, any gap in coverage, any discrepancy between our outbound and return leg data, he'll flag it. And then he'll come here himself. The proposal was dead. Chase had known it was dead before he offered it. The bribery gambit was a first move, not a solution, an opening bid in a negotiation that required establishing the principle of exchange before identifying the actual currency. Then what do you want? Chase asked. The question was directed at Briggs, but it was the other soldiers who answered. The corporal, the quiet woman who'd been tracking the conversation with analytical focus, spoke first. I want to not die in a jungle because my patrol stumbled into something above my pay grade. I want to go home. The driver. Simple. Exhausted. The voice of a man who'd spent years on a moon he didn't like, doing work he didn't believe in, counting days until rotation. I want the young soldier whose weapon had discharged the kid who'd shot Sainum, who was still crying intermittently, whose hands would carry that tremor for months. I want to not have shot a kid. I want that to not have happened. And Reyes. Still in the stream. Still empty-handed. I want to know what I saw at the bulldozer camp. His voice was quiet. Controlled. Older than his years. The shape between the vehicles. I told myself it was shadows. I told myself I imagined it. But I've been having dreams about it every night since, and now I'm sitting in a stream looking at the answer. Chase met his eyes. The private stared back with an expression that wasn't anger, wasn't fear. Curiosity. The specific curiosity of someone who'd spent weeks suppressing an observation that his rational mind couldn't explain, and who was now, finally, face to face with the explanation. What I saw, Reyes said carefully, is that this planet is alive in ways we weren't told about. What I saw is that NA6 refugees are being sheltered by someone who cares more about them than the company does. What I saw is that the bulldozer operation was sabotaged by people defending a graveyard, and that the investigation is chasing shadows while the real story is standing in front of me. Silence. The waterfall poured. The jungle held its breath for the second time in an hour. I didn't log the shape at the camp, Reyes continued. Because logging it would have meant an investigation, and investigations mean querage, and querage means someone loses their assignment or their life. I chose not to see what I saw. He paused. I can choose again. Through the bond, Norm's surprise. Grace's assessment he's offering deniability voluntarily. Adnite's attention, the elder sensing something in the young soldier's words that resonated with the neutral Imokria's description of allies who recognized the keeper's cause. Briggs looked at Reyes, at the corporal, at the driver, at the crying soldier and the two veterans who hadn't spoken but whose body language, weapons grounded, postures open, said more than words would. I'm a sergeant in the Resources Development Administration's Security Division. Briggs' voice was formal, careful, each word placed with the precision of a man building a legal defense in real time. My orders are to conduct reconnaissance and report findings. My findings today are elevated bioreadings consistent with documented sector anomalies. No structures of concern. No unauthorized contact. He looked at Chase. The look said, this is what I'm offering. Take it or leave it. But know that I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because the alternative involves explaining to Quaritch why my patrol engaged civilians, shot a child, and discovered something that will end my career whether I report it or not. The rest of you, Briggs addressed his soldiers. This patrol found nothing. Understood. Nods. Some reluctant. Some relieved. Reyes nodded, last slow, deliberate, the nod of someone making a conscious choice about which reality to inhabit. If we're found out, the corporal started. Then we deal with it then. Right now, we're dealing with this. Briggs stood. Water dripped from his fatigues. He collected his weapon, holstered it. The gesture was final, the sergeant sealing the agreement through action rather than words. The other soldiers stood. The crying kid wiped his face, picked up his weapon from the bank, holstered it with hands that still shook. The driver moved to the vehicles without looking back. The veterans fell into formation, mechanical, automatic, the comfort of procedure reasserting itself over the chaos of the last 20 minutes. Reyes stood last. He walked past Chase, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched the Avatar's massive frame towering over the private's human stature. He didn't look up, but he spoke, quietly enough that only Chase's NA6 enhanced hearing caught it. I'll feed false reports if you let the others go without trouble. The words were precise, rehearsed in the private's mind during the 12 minutes of Chase's explanation, refined and committed to before the conversation shifted to negotiation. I'll be your inside source. Or I can die here. Your choice. Chase looked down at the young soldier. 19. Maybe 20. 4 months from rotation. Carrying a secret that had been eating him since the bulldozer camp, and had just grown large enough to swallow his career. How do I contact you? Dead drop. Eastern perimeter, gate 7 maintenance locker. I check it every 3rd day. Reyes walked to the vehicles. Climbed in. Didn't look back. The patrol departed. 2 vehicles, 6 soldiers, 1 false report, and 1 intelligence asset that Chase hadn't planned, hadn't recruited, and hadn't expected. Tisei Lan's knife found its sheath. The sound bone on leather was the loudest thing in the jungle. You let them go. Her voice was flat. Yes, they will talk. Not today, not tomorrow, but one of them will talk. One of them will drink too much, or sleep too badly, or decide that loyalty to the colonel outweighs loyalty to a promise made in a stream. Maybe, definitely. Then we prepare for that. Chase turned to face her. Tisei Lan's expression was the familiar mask, controlled, sharp, the blade edge of displeasure that was indistinguishable from professional assessment. But underneath, in the body language that 33 days of proximity had taught him to read, something else. Not approval, not disagreement. Evaluation. The warrior measuring the leader's decision against the only metric that mattered to her. Does this make us safer or more vulnerable? If I'd killed them, Chase said, Quaritch would find 6 missing soldiers and send 100 more. This way, we have time. A patrol that reports nothing. An informant who chose his side. And a sergeant who's protecting himself. Not us, but the protection is the same. Tisei Lan held his gaze. 3 seconds. 5. The same duration she'd held it at their first meeting, knife at his throat, measuring the dreamwalker who'd offered shelter to people his species had tried to kill. Your mercy is a gamble. Everything I've done since waking up in this body is a gamble. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. Tisei Lan didn't smile, not in Chase's experience. Something smaller. An acknowledgement that the dreamwalker had made a bet she disagreed with and articulated his reasoning in terms she couldn't dismiss. She turned toward the grotto, paused at the waterfall's edge. The boy needs the healing pod. His arm is still bleeding. I know. Then stop talking and fix it. She ducked through the curtain of water. Chase followed. Inside, Adnite had Sanium at the healing pod. The biological structure reactivated the moment the patrol vehicle's engine sounds faded, glowed with the warm gold of accelerated recovery. The boy's face was pale beneath his bioluminescent markings, but his eyes tracked Chase with the specific alertness of someone who'd been shot and was very interested in knowing what happened next. They left, Sanium said. Not a question. They left. Will they come back? Not these ones. Through the bond, the network settled. 6 citizens, 5 bound, 1 unbound, processing the aftermath of the closest call the sanctuary had survived. Adnite's chant resumed, quiet and steady, the spiritual infrastructure rebuilding itself around a community that had bent but not broken. Grace's analysis flowed from Hell's Gate tactical assessment, evidence review, probability calculations for the false report's longevity. Norm's intelligence monitoring, scanning for any indication that the patrol's data packet had deviated from Briggs' stated intention. And Shadow Fang. The Viper Wolf appeared through the waterfall 5 minutes after the patrol departed, fur wet, ears forward, the alpha returning to a den that still stood. His nose found Sanom's wound. He licked it once Viper Wolf antiseptic, the saliva-carrying compounds that Pandora evolution had optimized for field triage. Sanom laughed. Wet, shaky, the sound of a boy who'd been shot for the first time and was discovering that he could still laugh after. Chase sat on the moss carpet. His hands, the ones that had been raised for 12 minutes while 6 weapons pointed at him, shook with the delayed tremor of adrenaline processing through a nervous system that was, despite everything, still human patterned at its core. The avatar body could run through jungle and survive gunshots and produce subharmonic commands that froze soldiers in their tracks. But the mind driving it was Chase Sinclair from Montana, and Chase Sinclair's hands shook after standoffs the way every human's hands shook after staring at mortality and choosing to stare back. The radio static would clear within the hour. The patrol's false report would transmit. Quaritch would review it, compare it to the outbound data, and either accept the discrepancy or investigate further. And in a maintenance locker at Gate 7, a dead drop would wait for a 19-year-old private who'd chosen for reasons Chase couldn't fully understand and didn't fully trust to stand on the side of people his training called the enemy. Through the bond, the network hummed. Damaged, strained, but intact. The sanctuary's bioluminescence brightened as Atonite's chant gained strength, the living walls responding to faith the way they responded to everything by growing toward the light. Sanom's arm healed in the pod's golden glow. T-Saylan cleaned her knife. And somewhere in the RDA's database, a patrol report was being filed that described exactly nothing, by a sergeant who would sleep badly tonight and every night after, carrying a truth he'd chosen to bury in the space between duty and survival. T-Saylan's anger occupied the sanctuary like a second atmosphere. She didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't brandish the knife that had stayed sheathed since the patrol departed 4 hours ago. She simply existed in a state of concentrated displeasure that the grotto's bioluminescence registered as an electromagnetic disturbance, the living walls flickering at irregular intervals, disrupted by the proximity of a consciousness broadcasting fury at a frequency the root network couldn't harmonize with. Chase sat near the pool. The system's interface floated in his peripheral vision, displaying the aftermath in numbers that the emotional reality couldn't contain. Crisis event resolved. Sanctuary, intact. Exposure level, partial. Citizens, all present. Injuries, 1 minor. Sanom healing, dot. Faith points expended, 20 FP, Viper Wolf summon. Current FP, 10. Current SP, 375. Current NE, 50/100. New asset, Private Reyes Intelligence Informant, unbound. Warning, exposure event creates permanent detection risk. Recommendation, upgrade concealment infrastructure. The numbers were accurate. The recommendation was sound. And none of it addressed the warrior pacing the upper ledge with the specific restlessness of someone who'd been overruled on a matter of survival and was deciding how to process the disagreement. Through the bond, Grace at Hell's Gate, monitoring the patrol's return through Norm's intelligence channel. The soldiers had reached base at 1,530. Briggs filed his report at 1,547. Chase could feel Grace's tension spike as she accessed the document through her research initiative credentials. The report reads, routine reconnaissance, sectors 7 to 8. Elevated bioreadings consistent with documented anomalies. Single Viper Wolf sighting, non-aggressive. No structures or unauthorized activity detected. Communication interference experienced between 1200 to 1245, attributed to electromagnetic environment. Recommend continued monitoring. He kept his word. For now, Grace sent. The report's data packet includes scanner readings from both passes. The outbound data is clean. The return leg data shows the neural density spike at the waterfall approach. If Quaritch cross-references the two, he'll see a discrepancy. A discrepancy that Briggs attributed to equipment variance between passes. It's plausible. Barely. But Quaritch isn't looking for plausible, he's looking for patterns. Through the bond, Norm's contribution, compressed from his communications monitoring station. Quaritch received the report at 1,603. No immediate response. No flagged queries. No follow-up orders. He's sitting on it. Sitting on it. The colonel who'd assumed personal command of the bulldozer investigation, who'd ordered expanded patrols through both sectors, who'd written this wasn't wildlife in a classified addendum that colonel was reviewing a report that described nothing unusual in the most heavily investigated area of his operational theater. Either Briggs' cover story held, or Quaritch was waiting. In the movie, Quaritch waited. He gathered intelligence, positioned assets, and struck when the target was fully exposed. He didn't react, he acted. On his timeline. With his resources. At his chosen moment. The meta-knowledge sat in Chase's chest like a stone. Useful and terrifying in equal measure. He knew the colonel's pattern from a film script, but the colonel in reality wasn't constrained by a screenwriter's narrative arc. Real Quaritch could deviate. Could accelerate. Could do things the movie version never needed to because the movie version had a protagonist with plot armor. Chase Sinclair had no plot armor. He had a grotto, 6 citizens, a worn knife, and a planetary consciousness that had jammed military communications for 45 minutes without being asked. Eywa protected the node. Autonomously. Without my authorization or even my awareness until it happened. She's invested in this sanctuary not because of me, but because it's part of her network. When I claimed the node, I didn't just gain territory. I gave Eywa a reason to defend this specific patch of her planet. The implication was enormous. The sanctuary wasn't just Chase's project. It was Eywa's outpost. A node in a planetary consciousness that had spent millions of years developing the most sophisticated biological network in known space, and that had just demonstrated the ability to interfere with human technology when that technology threatened a piece of her infrastructure. You are thinking too loudly. Tsay-Lan's voice came from above. Not angry, tired. The fury had metabolized over 4 hours of pacing into something more sustainable, a cold assessment that would last longer and cut deeper than the hot version. I'm running scenarios. You are running from the argument we need to have. Chase looked up. Tsay-Lan sat on the ledge's edge, legs dangling, knife across her knees. The same posture she'd adopted the night before the sabotage, when she'd taught him the hunter's meditation. But the context had shifted. That night, they'd been allies preparing for a shared operation. Tonight, they were allies who disagreed about whether the operation's conclusion constituted wisdom or weakness. Say what you need to say. You released 6 witnesses. Tsay-Lan's voice was measured. Every word placed with the careful precision she applied to knife work. 6 humans who saw the grotto, the citizens, the structures. 6 humans who know that NA6 survivors live under a Dreamwalker's protection in a sector the RDA has claimed for resource extraction. Briggs filed a clean report. Reyes is feeding us intelligence. The other 4 have no incentive to talk. Talking implicates them in failing to report what they saw. Incentive is a human word for a human problem. Humans talk when they drink, when they argue with lovers, when their commanders apply pressure, when the weight of what they know becomes heavier than the consequences of sharing it. She leaned forward. I have watched the machines come for my people twice. Both times, the humans knew something before the machines arrived. Both times, the knowledge leaked through channels that no one predicted. She's not wrong. She's rarely wrong about threat assessment. The Relang warrior who'd kept 3 survivors alive through 3 weeks of jungle running had earned her pessimism the way other people earned degrees through sustained exposure to reality. What would you have done? Chase asked. Tsay-Lan's jaw tightened. The question wasn't rhetorical, it demanded she articulate the alternative she'd been advocating through silence and body language since the patrol departed. I would have bound them or buried them. The words landed in the grotto's acoustic space with the flat certainty of a woman who'd stopped measuring morality by the standards of people who hadn't watched their clan die. Binding is voluntary. None of them would have consented. Then burial. You're talking about killing 6 people. I'm talking about ensuring that 6 people cannot destroy everything we've built. Her voice didn't rise. Tsay-Lan's anger was a blade, not a blaze it cut without heat. Your mercy is a luxury purchased with other people's safety. When the machines come, and they will come, because humans always come, the cost of your mercy will be paid by Adonite. By Sainum. By the ancestors whose graves you swore to protect. Through the bond, Adonite's awareness, the elder monitoring from his meditation position. He'd been listening. His emotional register carried something unexpected, not agreement with Tsay-Lan, not disagreement with Chase. Sorrow. The deep, structural grief of a man who'd survived long enough to understand that both positions were correct and neither was sufficient. If we'd killed them, Chase said carefully, Quaritch would have 6 missing soldiers. He'd send 50 more. Armed, angry, with authorization to engage. We'd be defending this grotto against a military response instead of a bureaucratic investigation. If we'd killed them, well, Tsay-Lan countered, there would be no bodies. The jungle eats evidence. Then Aters, viper wolves, the forest's own decomposition, 6 soldiers who disappeared during a patrol in hostile territory. Quaritch would investigate. He would find nothing. And the investigation would end where all investigations end, when the evidence becomes soil. She's thought about this. Not impulsively, methodically. The Relang warrior has been calculating the logistics of making 6 people disappear since the moment Chase said we don't kill them. She arrived at a solution. She's furious that he didn't. I can't be that, Chase said. Whatever I'm building here, whatever this network becomes, it can't be built on murdered prisoners. The moment I kill people to keep a secret, I become the thing that destroyed your clan. Tsay-Lan flinched. The movement was microscopic, a tightening around the eyes, a shift in the knife's position on her knees, but Chase had spent 33 days learning her body language, and the flinch was the loudest thing she'd done since the patrol left. He'd hit something real. The comparison between his actions and the RDA's connected to a wire in Tsay-Lan's internal architecture that she kept insulated. The wire that carried the current between protecting my people and becoming the enemy to do it. Silence. The waterfall poured. The healing pod glowed with Sainum's recovery, the boy sleeping in the golden light while his arm knitted itself closed. I don't agree with you, Tsay-Lan said. Quieter now. The anger compressed to a density that would last for days rather than hours. But I will follow your decision. Because the alternative is leaving, and I have nowhere left to go that isn't yours. The admission cost her. Chase could see the price in the way her spine straightened, compensating for vulnerability with posture, the warrior's reflex when the armor cracks. Tsay-Lan, don't. I said what I needed to say. You heard it. That's enough. She stood. Collected her knife. Descended the ledge, not the kill drop of combat, but the measured climb of someone who'd finished a difficult conversation and needed to be somewhere else. She crossed the grotto, paused at Sainum's pod to check his bandaging with hands that were gentle in ways her words never were, and disappeared through the waterfall into the evening jungle. Chase sat with the weight of a disagreement that had no resolution, only management. Tisei-lan was right about the risk. He was right about the principle. Both things were true, and the truth of each eroded the other like river against stone. Through the bond, Adonite's chant began again. Low, steady. The elder rebuilding the sanctuary's spiritual foundations the way Grace rebuilt its scientific ones methodically, patiently, with the knowledge that foundations took longer than the structures they supported. The sanctuary pulsed. Evening cycle. Violet and indigo. The living walls settling into conservation mode, banking energy for another day of existence in a world that had just gotten more dangerous. Somewhere in Hell's Gate, 6 soldiers were eating dinner. Some of them were thinking about what they'd seen. Most of them were trying not to. And one Reyes, the private who'd dropped his weapon in a stream, was lying in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, counting the days until his next shift at Gate 7's maintenance locker. Chase sat alone in the grotto. His kingdom 2 nodes, 6 citizens, 1 informant, and a woman who'd followed him into combat and now disagreed with him about its aftermath. The system's interface hovered in the dark, displaying resources and citizens and territorial influence with the impersonal precision of a tool that didn't care about the moral architecture of the decisions that generated its numbers. Quest notification new. Consolidate position, upgrade sanctuary node to level 3. Reward, 200 SP, advanced concealment blueprint, +1 NTI. No deadline recommended priority, high. The system wanted him to build, to grow, to turn a grotto and a grove into something that could withstand what was coming. He pulled up the upgrade menu. Level 3 required 300 SP. He had 375. Enough barely. Build. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. Not fight. Not kill. Build. His hands had stopped shaking. The aftershock of the standoff had processed through his system over 4 hours, metabolized by the avatar body's endocrine regulation and the sanctuary's regenerative field. What remained wasn't calm, it was resolve. The specific determination of a project manager who'd looked at a disaster and decided to rebuild rather than retreat. The upgrade would take 12 hours. By morning, the sanctuary would be stronger. By morning, the concealment options would be better. By morning, the world would be the same dangerous place it had been at noon, but the position within it would be fractionally more defensible. Upgrade sanctuary node level 2 to level 3. Cost, 300 SP. Confirmed. Construction time, 12 hours. Remaining SP, 75. The grotto shifted. Root systems activated. The biological architecture began its expansion, deeper foundations, broader root networks, enhanced bioluminescent infrastructure. The walls thickened. The moss carpet densified. The entire chamber hummed with the frequency of growth, the patient vibration of a living system making itself harder to destroy. Through the bond, 5 citizens registering the upgrade. Adonite's approval, warm and immediate. Sainum's sleepy awareness, the boy feeling the sanctuary strengthen around him while the healing pod closed his wound. Norm's relief at Hell's Gate, the intelligence operative glad that the administrator was building rather than retreating. Grace's scientific interest, her mind already cataloging the upgrade's observable effects. And beyond the waterfall, in the jungle where Tisei-lan had gone to process her anger alone, silence. The warrior who wouldn't bind, who disagreed with Mercy, who'd fought beside Chase and against his decisions in the same afternoon. She felt nothing through the bond, because the bond couldn't reach her. But the sanctuary's territorial awareness registered her warmth. Moving, circling. The patrol loop she'd established weeks ago, walked every evening, defending a perimeter she claimed to resent. She was still here. That was enough. Grace's handwriting was terrible. Not the digital text on her daytopad that was pristine, formatted in the rigorous academic style she'd drilled into a generation of xenobiology students. But the handwritten notes she taped to the sanctuary walls, specimen labels, protocol reminders, structural observations scrawled on waterproof paper in a script that looked like a seismograph during an earthquake, those were barely legible. Documentation Protocol 7. Grace stood at the grotto's western wall, daytopad in one hand, sample jar in the other. All biological specimens collected within territorial boundaries must be logged with date, coordinates, neural density reading, and ambient faith point generation rate at time of collection. She tapped the sample jar. This is a moss sample from Pikayer's burial site. Neural density, 847. FP rate, 0.03 per hour. Date, day 40. Coordinates. Grace. Chase leaned against the entrance wall, arms crossed. You've been labeling moss for 3 hours. And I'll be labeling moss for 3 more, because somebody, she pointed the jar at him, spent 33 days building a biological kingdom without a single documented methodology. Do you know what happens to research without documentation? It doesn't exist. It's anecdote. It's campfire stories. Through the bond, Norm's amusement from Hell's Gate, the xenolinguist listening to his mentor's lecture with the fond recognition of someone who'd survived 100 such diatribes. She reorganized the linguistics lab twice before she was satisfied with the filing system. You're getting off easy. The sanctuary's level 3 upgrade had completed on day 34, 12 hours after Chase initiated it. The results were visible, walls 2 meters thicker, root network extending 3 additional kilometers in every direction, bioluminescence output capable of powering 3 times the previous structural load. The system had unlocked an advanced concealment blueprint, a 150 SP investment that would create a permanently active camouflage layer across the sanctuary's exterior, masking its electromagnetic signature to match the surrounding forest's baseline. He'd bought it immediately. 150 SP, leaving 75 in reserve. 24 hours of construction. The result, a living skin of neural-neutral vegetation covering the grotto's rock face, its waterfall entrance, and the surrounding 100 meters of terrain. From the outside, the sanctuary now looked like exactly what it was supposed to look like: dense Pandora jungle. No organized patterns. No engineered bioluminescence. Just forest. From the inside, the change was remarkable. The camouflage layer filtered incoming light into the green-gold spectrum of the surrounding canopy, making the grotto's interior feel like a sun-dappled clearing rather than a cave. The living walls still pulsed with organized bioluminescence, but the pulses were contained behind the camouflage membrane, invisible to any observer who wasn't already inside. Grace had nearly cried when she first saw the concealment layer's electromagnetic readings. Background noise, she'd whispered, running her sensor array across the exterior surface. It's reading as background noise. Quaritch could park a scanner on top of this place and the readings would show nothing but forest. That had been 6 days ago. Since then, Grace had converted her scientific rigor into an organizational overhaul that was transforming the sanctuary from an improvised hideout into a structured operation. Research protocols, specimen documentation, citizen health monitoring, twice daily checks through the bond, logged on Grace's datapad in encrypted files that she backed up to a personal device hidden in her quarters at Hell's Gate. Resource tracking, NE generation rates, FP accumulation, SP expenditure history. Territorial mapping, every organism within the expanded 8-kilometer radius catalogued by species, location, and neural activity level. The sanctuary, which had been a grotto with a viper wolf and a lot of good intentions, was becoming a research station, a refugee shelter, and a military intelligence operation simultaneously. Grace ran all three with the specific intensity of a woman who'd spent 15 years watching the RDA mismanage Pandora's greatest resource and finally had the tools to do it right. The research initiative data is due to Selfridge by day 45, Grace said, still labeling Moss. 5 days. The report needs to be comprehensive enough to justify our continued field presence and boring enough that nobody reads past the abstract. Comprehensive and boring. Your specialty. I'll ignore that because you're not wrong. She capped the sample jar. Norm, how's the intelligence feed? Through the bond, Norm's update, structured in the compressed packet format they'd developed for operational communication. The RDA's patrol rotation in sectors 7 to 8 had been reduced from daily to tri-weekly. Quaritch had reassigned resources to a new operational area south of Hell's Gate where a separate indigenous contact incident had demanded attention. The investigation file on the bulldozer sabotage remained open but deprioritized. Briggs' patrol report had been reviewed and filed without supplementary queries. Andrea's, the private's first dead drop intelligence, had arrived on day 36, a handwritten note in the Gate 7 maintenance locker, detailing Quaritch's current operational priorities, upcoming patrol schedules, and a single crucial piece of information: the quarterly medical evaluation had been postponed by 2 weeks due to administrative restructuring. Grace's neural anomaly flag wouldn't be reviewed until day 75 at the earliest. 2 weeks bought. Not by us, by bureaucratic inertia. The RDA's institutional friction is our best defense. Adonite. Chase turned to the elder, who sat at his customary position near the western wall. You mentioned refugees. Adonite set down his staff. The gesture was deliberate, the elder preparing for a topic that carried weight. Sainum's patrols have detected NA6 movement in the sectors northeast of our territory. 3 individuals, perhaps 4. They move at night. They avoid established trails. They are running. From what? From the same machines that drove us here. Adonite's voice carried the specific gravity of someone stating the obvious because the obvious needed stating. The RDA's clearance operations did not stop at our territory. They continued northeast. Other clans, smaller than ours, occupied those forests. Some fled to the Omaticaya. Some fled deeper. Some. He paused. Some are still running. Through the bond, the moral calculation, distributed across 6 mines. More refugees meant more citizens. More citizens meant more faith generation, more skills, more bodies for defense. It also meant more mouths, more detection risk, more personalities to manage in a community that was already straining its organizational capacity. We should find them, Sainum said. The boy stood near the grotto entrance, arm fully healed, the graze that the patrol's bullet had carved into his bicep now a faint pale line against blue skin, visible only if you knew where to look. They're alone. We can help. We can barely help ourselves, Grace countered. Our concealment is better but not perfect. Every new citizen increases the network's electromagnetic signature. If we grow too fast, if we don't grow, Adonite interrupted gently, we remain what we are, a handful of survivors hiding in a cave. Eywa's keeper was not given these gifts to hide. The fundamental tension. The scale problem that every kingdom builder faced, whether the kingdom was a grotto on an alien moon or a startup in a strip mall. Expand and risk exposure. Consolidate and risk irrelevance. Both paths had costs. Neither offered safety. We find them, Chase said. Carefully. We assess before we approach. And we don't offer binding until we understand who they are and what they need. Grace's mouth opened, objection forming then closed. The scientist deferring to the administrator, not happily but practically. She'd argue the methodology later. In private. Through the bond, where the argument could be compressed into data points rather than expanded into lectures. Sanem's markings pulsed bright. The boy was already planning patrol routes, his mind filling with the terrain maps he'd memorized during weeks of scouting, recalculating coverage areas to include the northeastern sectors where unknown NA6 moved through darkness. Through the bond, the network hummed with purpose. Not the desperate energy of the patrol crisis, something steadier. The patient vibration of a community that had survived its worst day and was choosing to grow rather than shrink in its aftermath. Chase pulled up the system interface. Resources, 75 SP, 18 FP, NE regenerating. 2 nodes operational. Advanced concealment active. Healing pod functional. Watcher vine surveillance covering the full 8-kilometer radius. Defensive thorns restored and concealed beneath the camouflage layer. Not much, but more than yesterday. And more than yesterday was the only metric that mattered. The refugees were 3 NA6 from a clan Chase didn't recognize, not Relang, not Omaticea, something smaller. A family unit, mother, father, adolescent daughter. They'd been sighted by Sanem's extended patrols at the territory's northeastern edge, moving through the undergrowth with the careful pace of people who'd learned that speed drew attention. Chase assigned the contact to Norm. The logic was sound. Norm Spellman was a xenolinguist who'd studied NA6 culture for a decade. He spoke the language fluently, understood clan protocols, and had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of interaction. More importantly, Chase couldn't be everywhere at once. The sanctuary demanded his physical presence for system operations, and Hell's Gate demanded his cover presence for institutional protection. Delegation wasn't optional, it was survival. Approach from the south. Chase briefed Norm through the bond while the linguist prepped at the sanctuary. Non-threatening posture. Hands visible. Speak Omaticaean, it's the most widely understood dialect. Offer water and food first. Don't mention binding until they've had time to settle. Norm nodded. His avatar body carried the specific tension of a student about to take a practical exam, prepared, anxious, determined to apply theory correctly. Through the bond, Chase could feel the man's internal checklist, cultural protocols, greeting phrases, body language guidelines, the NA6 respect hierarchy that governed first contact situations. I've studied this, Norm said. I know the protocols. I can handle it. He can handle it. He's the most qualified person in the network for this task. I need to trust the delegation. Chase returned to Hell's Gate for the afternoon's cover maintenance lab reports, specimen analysis, the institutional performance that kept James Chen's existence justified. Through the bond, he maintained passive awareness of Norm's position, the linguist hiking northeast with Shadow Fang as escort, approaching the coordinates where Sanem's patrol had last detected the refugee family. The contact went wrong in the first 30 seconds. Chase was mid-sentence in a lab report when Norm's emotional register spiked through the bond, not the managed anxiety of preparation, but the sharp, hot flare of social catastrophe. Through the link's shared awareness, Chase caught fragments, Norm's avatar emerging from the undergrowth into a small clearing where 3 NA6 crouched beside a dead fire. The mother turning, eyes widening, the specific expression that Chase had seen on Tisei Land's face the first time they'd met, not fear but fury, the defensive rage of someone who'd been hunted and had just been found. Norm raised his hands, spoke. The Omaticaean greeting, Oel Ngadi Kamai, I see you delivered with textbook pronunciation and the wrong body language. The NA6 man, father, protector, his body positioned between Norm and his family, heard the words and saw the body. An avatar. A dreamwalker. 9 feet of human-made biology wearing NA6 form, approaching from the south with a viper wolf at his side, in a sector where the last dreamwalker adjacent event had been bulldozers and bullets. He threw a rock. Not at Norm's head, at his feet. A warning. The NA6 equivalent of a drawn weapon. The message, come closer, and the next one hits flash. Through the bond, Norm's panic. The linguist who'd spent years studying NA6 culture from the safety of academic journals was discovering that theoretical knowledge and practical application were separated by the same gap that separated reading about fire and being burned. His hands stayed raised. His voice stayed calm. But his body, his avatar body, untrained in the micro-expressions and postural cues that NA6 used to assess threat, was broadcasting the wrong signals. His weight was forward. Aggressive, in NA6 body language. A person offering peace stood with weight on the rear foot, shoulders dropped, head tilted to expose the throat. Norm was doing the opposite, shoulders squared, head level, weight distributed for stability. The posture of a person bracing for impact, which, to a NA6 who'd been running from human aggression, looked exactly like the posture of a person preparing to attack. I'm not. Norm tried again. We have food, water, a safe place. The daughter screamed. Not at Norm, at Shadow Fang. The viper wolf, positioned at Norm's right flank, had responded to the thrown rock with a low growl that the NA6 family interpreted as the opening statement of a predator-prey negotiation. Shadow Fang wasn't aggressive. Through the bond, Chase registered the wolf's emotional state as protective alertness, not hunting mode, but the family didn't have access to the bond. They saw teeth. They heard threat. The mother grabbed the daughter. The father grabbed a sharpened stick, not a weapon, a tool, repurposed in desperation. The family moved as a unit, backing toward the tree line with the coordinated retreat of people who'd practiced this exact maneuver a dozen times during weeks of running. Wait, Norm stepped forward. Wrong. Forward movement toward retreating NA6 violated every first contact protocol the Avatar program had developed. The step triggered the father's fight response. The sharpened stick came up. Shadow Fang's growl intensified pack instinct, reading the pointed weapon as a threat to his bonded companion. The situation cascaded. Norm, stop. Don't move. The bond command hit Norm mid-stride. He froze. But the damage was done. The NA6 family had seen a Dreamwalker advance toward them with a predator at his side after their retreat was underway. The interaction's emotional architecture, fear, aggression, misread signals had constructed a narrative that no amount of linguistic competence could rewrite. They ran. Not the panicked flight of prey, the controlled retreat of experienced survivors, the father covering the family's movement with the sharpened stick while the mother and daughter disappeared into the undergrowth. 30 seconds. Gone. The clearing empty except for a dead fire and a xenolinguist standing motionless with his hands raised and his world crumbling. Through the bond, Norm's devastation. A tidal wave of shame, self-recrimination, and the specific agony of a person who'd prepared for something all their life and failed at the moment it mattered. His avatar body stood in the clearing while his internal voice, audible through the bond in raw, unfiltered emotional output, catalogued every mistake. Wait forward. I had my wait forward. I know the posture protocols. I studied them for 3 years. And when it mattered, I defaulted to human body language because my instincts aren't NA6, they're human, and the avatar body follows the mind, not the training. When the mind panics. Shadow Fang. I should have left him at the perimeter. A predator escort to a first contact approach. What was I thinking? That's not in any protocol because it's obviously wrong. Obviously. A child would know that. The step. I stepped forward while they were retreating. I stepped forward. The one thing, the single most basic thing, and I. Norm. Chase pushed through the bond. Firm. Not angry, authoritative. The project manager's voice, cutting through emotional noise to reach the functional layer underneath. Come back to the sanctuary. We'll debrief. I lost them. 3 people who needed help, and I lost them because I couldn't. Come back. Now. That's not a suggestion. Norm returned to the sanctuary at 1600. His avatar body moved through the jungle with the mechanical precision of someone operating on autopilot while their conscious mind replayed failure in a loop. Shadow Fang padded beside him, the Viper Wolf's awareness carrying confused concern the pack member was in distress, and the Alpha's instinct was to provide comfort through proximity, which was the one thing Norm couldn't accept without feeling worse about the Wolf's role in the debacle. Chase met him at the waterfall entrance. Norm's face was the specific expression of someone who'd been crying in avatar form, the tear ducts that shouldn't have functioned producing moisture that the network's biological modifications had made possible. His eyes were red-rimmed. His hands were fists at his sides. Don't say it's okay. His voice was flat. Controlled with effort. It's not okay. I studied NA6 first contact protocols for 3 years at UC Davis. I wrote a paper on cross-cultural body language misinterpretation in high-stress xenolinguistic environments. And when I was in the field, face-to-face with the actual people, I reverted to baseline human behavior because the avatar body follows the mind, and my mind is still a nervous American academic who can't. Norm. Who can't even stand correctly when someone throws a rock, let alone. Norm. Sit down. The xenolinguist sat on the moss. The moss adjusted to his body shape, the sanctuary providing comfort that Norm's self-recrimination wouldn't allow him to accept. Chase sat across from him. Not beside a cross. The positioning of a debriefing, not a consolation. If Norm needed comfort, at night could provide it. What he needed from Chase was something harder, an honest assessment of what went wrong and a plan to fix it. Tell me every mistake you identified. Chase's voice was even. In order. Norm listed them. 15 distinct errors, catalogued with the obsessive thoroughness of an academic who turned self-destruction into a research methodology. Body language. Positioning. Shadow Fang's proximity. The forward step. Vocal cadence. Eye contact duration. Hand height. Head angle. Each one a deviation from the protocols he'd spent years mastering in theory. Chase listened. Absorbed. Cross-referenced against the bond's emotional replay of the encounter, which provided data that Norm's conscious analysis couldn't, the NA6 father's heart rate at each stage, the daughter's fear response, the mother's specific trigger, not Norm's approach, but Shadow Fang's growl, which had confirmed the family's existing framework of Dreamwalker equals Predator alliance. You've identified what went wrong, Chase said when Norm finished. Now tell me why. Because I panicked. Before that? Why were you unprepared for panic? Silence. Norm's forehead creased, the academic encountering a question that his self-flagellation hadn't addressed. Because nobody taught me what panic feels like in an avatar body. The training covers procedures. It doesn't cover the moment when procedures fail and your body does whatever 3 million years of human evolution programmed it to do. And there it is. The gap I missed. Chase had assigned Norm a task he was qualified for on paper, linguistically, academically. What Chase hadn't done was train him for the reality of the task, the physical stress, the body language overrides, the difference between knowing a protocol and executing it while 3 frightened NA6 stared at you like you were the latest installment of the worst thing that had ever happened to them. Competence didn't transfer automatically. Skills required practice. And Chase, the project manager who'd spent 7 years at Meridian Energy delegating tasks to people whose capability he assessed through resumes and interviews, had made the same mistake here that he'd made in conference rooms on Earth. He'd evaluated the file and assumed the person matched it. I didn't train you, Chase said. That's on me. Norm looked up. Surprise broke through the self-recrimination. You know the protocols. You know the language. You know the culture. What you don't know is how to make an avatar body communicate what your mind intends when your mind is under stress. That's a physical skill. It requires practice. And I sent you into a first contact situation without ever practicing with you. Through the bond, Norm processing. The shame didn't disappear, it was too fresh, too raw, built on the specific foundation of someone who defined themselves by competence and had just been incompetent in the most consequential way possible. But the processing shifted. From I failed because I'm inadequate to I failed because the preparation was incomplete. A different architecture. One that pointed toward a solution rather than a grave. We practice, Chase said. Starting tomorrow. Tsay-Lan runs the drills, she knows NA6 body language better than either of us. We practice approach, retreat, escalation, de-escalation. We practice until your avatar's stress response defaults match the protocols your mind knows. And the refugees. We find them again. Sanem's patrols will locate them within days. When we approach next time, you'll be ready. Norm's hands unclenched. Not fully, the fists loosened to something that wasn't relaxed but wasn't combative. The first step of a recovery process that would take weeks. Through the bond, Shadow Fang's awareness, the wolf curled at the grotto's edge, radiating the confused concern of a pack member who didn't understand why his companion was in pain but wanted to fix it. The alpha's emotional transmission carried a simple offer: warm, close, here. Norm reached out and placed his hand on the viper wolf's flank. Shadow Fang leaned in. The wolf's warmth, pack warmth, bond warmth, the specific comfort of a creature that measured love in proximity and presence seeped through the contact into Norm's avatar skin. I'll do better, Norm said. Quiet. The promise of a man who'd memorized failure and intended to make it fuel. I know. Chase stood. But first, I'm going to do better. Because sending you unprepared was my failure, not yours. And I don't get to repeat my mistakes any more than you do. He crossed to the grotto's supply area, the section Grace had organized with her maddening thoroughness, and pulled out a blank data pad. For the first time since waking in the wrong body, Chase began writing instructions. Not system commands. Not cover stories. Not tactical plans. Training protocols. Step by step, scenario by scenario, the kind of documentation he should have created the moment Norm bound to the network. How to approach NA6 refugees. How to manage an avatar body under stress. How to position Shadow Fang during first contact. Answer: don't. How to read body language signals that indicated escalation versus curiosity versus fear. The kind of document that a project manager wrote when a task had been delegated without sufficient preparation, the corrective documentation that turned failure into process improvement. Norm watched him write. Through the bond, the xenolinguist's emotional register shifting. Shame still present but receding, replaced by something more functional. The recognition that failure was data, and data could be used to build something better. Grace's voice came through the bond from Hell's Gate, where she was filing the research initiative's weekly update. What are you writing? Training manual. Should have written it weeks ago. A pause. Then, send me a copy when you're done. I'll add the xenobiology sections. Through the bond, the network's collective awareness settling around the failure like soil around a seed. Not burying it. Containing it. Building from it. The refugees Norm had frightened were still out there. Moving. Running. Alone in a jungle that was getting less safe by the day, in a sector where the RDA's patrols and the network's growth were both expanding into territory that belonged to neither. They'd be found again. And next time, the approach would be different. Tsay-Lan's teaching method was violence. Not actual violence, the kind of controlled physical correction that a NA6 warrior applied to students who got the body language wrong. A tap on the shoulder that meant wait back. A push on the hip that meant angle your stance. A flat palmed strike to the chest that meant you just died because your torso was facing the speaker instead of turned, and facing a NA6 stranger means challenge, not greeting. Norm absorbed the corrections with the grim determination of a man converting shame into competence. 3 days since the refugee debacle, and the xenolinguist had arrived at the sanctuary each morning at 0600, avatar body stretched, data pad loaded with Chase's training protocols, ready for a curriculum that bore no resemblance to the academic programs he'd attended at UC Davis. Your hands. Tsay-Lan circled Norm the way she circled perimeter threats, evaluating, cataloging weaknesses, preparing to exploit them for educational purposes. Open. Lower. NA6 greet with palms visible at waist level. You hold them at chest height like a dreamwalker asking for surrender. Norm adjusted. His hands dropped 6 inches. The change was subtle but visible, the avatar body's posture shifting from defensive to receptive. Better. Now the eyes. What about the eyes? You look at the mouth when you speak. NA6 look at the eyes. Eye contact establishes intention. Mouth watching implies distrust, you're reading lips instead of reading spirit. Tsay-Lan stopped circling. Stood directly in front of Norm, close enough that the height difference between their NA6 frames was negligible. Look at me. Norm looked. His avatar eyes met Tsay-Lan's yellow to yellow, the same iris color but separated by decades of different experience. The xenolinguist who'd studied NA6 culture through textbooks staring at the warrior who'd survived it through stubbornness and grief. Good. Hold it. Don't blink first. Norm blinked at 8 seconds. Tsay-Lan's expression didn't change, which was, by her standards, withering criticism. Again. Chase watched from the grotto entrance, the training manual's latest draft open on his desktop pad. The document had grown from a bare outline to 30 pages in 3 days: contact protocols, body language guides, stress response management, cultural sensitivity frameworks. Grace had added xenobiology sections covering NA6 physiological stress indicators. Adonite had contributed a spiritual context appendix explaining how different clans interpreted dreamwalker presence. Sainum had drawn diagrams of NA6 greeting postures so detailed they could have been published in an anthropology journal. The manual was a team product. The first one they'd created together, built from failure rather than theory. Through the bond, the training's effect on Norm was measurable. The xenolinguist's stress response patterns had shifted over 3 days, not eliminated, but channeled. His avatar body was learning to default to NA6 postural norms under pressure instead of reverting to human baselines. The gap between knowing and doing was narrowing with each correction Tse Lan applied. She's a natural teacher. Not the encouraging kind, the kind who expects competence and treats anything less as a personal insult. Norm responds to it because it's the same model Grace used in the lab: high standards, no excuses, genuine investment in the student's success disguised as permanent dissatisfaction. Grace herself operated a parallel track scientific documentation training that turned the sanctuary's data collection from Chase's haphazard specimen gathering into a structured research program. Sample protocols, equipment calibration schedules, cross-referenced neural density databases that tracked every reading from every node in a format that was simultaneously legitimate science and operational intelligence. If someone reviews our published data, Grace explained to Norm during a combined session, they need to see methodology that justifies our field presence. Every number we report has to be real. Every conclusion has to be supportable. The cover works because the science works. Adonite's contribution was less visible but equally essential. The elder spent hours with Sainum and, when she allowed it, with Tse Lan reconstructing the cultural frameworks that would govern the network's interactions with other NA6 groups. Greeting protocols, hospitality obligations, the complex hierarchies of respect and obligation that governed interclan relations. Knowledge that the Relang had preserved through oral tradition, now being transmitted to a network that would need it when contact with larger clans became inevitable. Roles are forming, not assigned earned. Grace runs science. Adonite runs culture. Norm handles diplomacy. Tse Lan handles combat and training. Sainum handles scouting and support. And I, Chase, set down the desktop pad. Through the bond, the network's collective productivity hummed at frequencies he'd never detected during the early days, the specific vibration of people working toward coordinated goals, each one's contribution amplifying the others. It reminded him of Meridian energy in its best quarter, teams aligned, processes functioning, the organizational machinery running at an efficiency that masked the enormous effort required to achieve it. Except at Meridian, the stakes had been quarterly revenue. Here, the stakes were survival. Day 46. The test. Sainum's patrols had relocated the refugee family from Norm's failed contact. The mother, father, and daughter, now camped in a ravine 4 kilometers northeast of the territory. They'd been stationary for 2 days, running low on food. The father's defensive energy was diminished. The mother's calculated retreat posture had softened into the exhaustion of someone who'd stopped running not because it was safe but because there was nowhere left to run. Norm went alone. No Shadow Fang. No escort. The training protocols specified, first contact with traumatized NA6 required a single, non-threatening presence. Additional bodies, especially predator bodies, escalated the perceived threat level past the threshold where communication was possible. Through the bond, Chase monitored from the sanctuary. Passive awareness. Not micromanaging, observing. The project manager's discipline: deploy the trained operative, trust the training, intervene only if the situation exceeds the operative's capacity. Norm entered the ravine from the south. Weight on the rear foot. Shoulders dropped. Head tilted to expose the throat. The NA6 submission posture that communicated, I am not a threat, I am not dominant, I approach with respect. His hands were at waist level, palms visible. His eyes found the father's and held. The father tensed. The sharpened stick came up, the same stick he'd brandished during the first contact, the tool become weapon that was the only defense a displaced NA6 could improvise. Norm stopped. 6 meters distant. Didn't step forward. Didn't retreat. Held the posture. Oel Ngati Kamai. The greeting came in perfect Omatikayan, delivered with the specific tonal patterns that Tse Lan had drilled into him over 72 hours of correction. But this time, the words matched the body. The sound matched the stance. The message was coherent across every channel a NA6 could read: visual, auditory, postural, intentional. The father's stick lowered. Not to his side, to a neutral position. Still accessible. Still a weapon, but no longer pointed. Through the bond, Norm's heart rate spiking. The training held despite the fear. His avatar body maintained the posture his mind wanted to abandon, the 3 days of Tse Lan's corrections overriding the reflexes that had destroyed the first contact. Norm extended his hand. Not reaching, offering. In the hand, a wrapped package of food. Fruit from the sanctuary's territory, where the node's influence made everything grow richer and sweeter than the surrounding jungle. The best food available. Wrapped in leaves from the Healing Pod's auxiliary garden, clean and fragrant. The daughter moved first. 16, maybe. Thin from weeks of insufficient nutrition. Her eyes locked on the food with an intensity that bypassed cultural protocol and connected directly to biological need. She looked at her father. He looked at her. At the food. At Norm. The stick went to his side. Norm placed the food on a rock between them. Stepped back. Maintained eye contact. Said nothing. The training protocols specified, after the offering, silence. Let the recipients control the pace. Let them approach on their terms. The daughter took the food. Unwrapped it. The father watched Norm the entire time, not with the cold assessment of a threat evaluator, but with the cautious attention of someone trying to decide if the universe had just produced a miracle or a trap. The contact lasted 20 minutes. No binding discussed. No sanctuary mentioned. Just food, presence, and the beginning of a trust that would require many more visits to become functional. Norm returned to the sanctuary at 1400. His avatar body vibrated with the specific energy of success, not triumph, not celebration. The quieter satisfaction of someone who'd failed, studied the failure, and produced a different result. Through the bond, T-Say-Lan's awareness, tracking Norm's return from her perimeter position. Her emotional register carried something Chase hadn't detected before: not approval. T-Say-Lan didn't approve of things, she tolerated them, but the absence of disapproval. The instructor registering that her student had applied the curriculum correctly. Chase met Norm at the waterfall. How did it go? Norm's face split into a grin that his avatar body somehow made look exactly like his human one. I didn't step forward. I didn't bring Shadow Fang. I didn't default to chest-level hands. And she took the food. The daughter. She took the food and ate it in front of me. In NA6 culture, eating in someone's presence is an act of trust. An act of trust. Norm's grin held, then softened. I thought about every correction T-Say-Lan made. Every time she hit me for standing wrong. When the father raised the stick, my body wanted to step back. But T-Say-Lan's voice was in my head louder than the fear. Wait back. Palms visible. Eyes on eyes. Through the bond, the specific warmth of pride that a network administrator felt when a citizen succeeded. Not possessive appreciative. The same feeling Chase had experienced at Meridian when a junior team member delivered a presentation they'd been terrified of, and the presentation worked. Training works. Delegation works. When the preparation matches the task. 8 hours of sleep that night. Genuine sleep, not the half-rest of a nervous system maintaining bond awareness at the expense of REM cycles. Chase dreamed not of the system, not of Quaritch, not of the patrol or the sabotage. He dreamed of organizational charts. Color-coded boxes with names in them, lines of authority connecting positions to functions, the architecture of something that was becoming too complex for one person to hold in their head. It was the most peaceful dream he'd had since Montana. Shadow Fang's territorial alert carried a flavor Chase hadn't tasted before. Not threat. The Viper Wolf's usual danger signal was hot, sharp, the chemical signature of adrenaline processed through pack instinct circuits. This was cooler, more complex. The neural equivalent of the wolf tilting his head at something he couldn't categorize, not prey, not predator, not pack, something else. 3. Coming from east. Not running. Not hiding. Moving like they own the ground. Through the territorial awareness buff, 3 signatures, NA6 sized, entering the outer boundary of the sanctuary's 8-kilometer radius. Their movement pattern was organized triangular formation, point man ahead, 2 flankers spread at 45-degree angles. Disciplined. Deliberate. The spatial arrangement of people who'd been trained to cover terrain rather than flee through it. Chase was at the sanctuary, reviewing Grace's latest research submission with red pen precision that would have made his Meridian Energy supervisor proud. The alert interrupted his focus like a cold hand on the back of his neck. Norm. Grace. We have visitors. Through the bond, twin spikes of attention. Grace at Hell's Gate, freezing mid-keystroke. Norm in the xenolinguistics lab, his foot stopping mid-tap. Not refugees, Chase clarified. Military movement pattern. NA6. 3 of them. Omaticaya? Grace's analysis was immediate. The regional territory mapping shows Omaticaya patrol routes east of our position. If they've extended their scouts, then they've noticed us. T-Say-Lan was already moving. Through Sainum's awareness, Chase tracked the warrior's response. She'd been at the grove, checking the defensive thorn's concealment, and the moment the alert reached the network's ambient awareness, her body shifted from maintenance mode to interception posture. Knife drawn. War paint still on from the morning's training session with Norm. Moving east through the canopy with the speed and silence of someone who'd been anticipating this contact since the day she'd arrived. T-Say-Lan. Don't engage. Intercept and assess. No response through the bond. She wasn't bound. But through Sainum's perception of her departure vector, Chase read compliance. She was heading to intercept, not to fight. The distinction was one he'd learned to trust in 6 weeks of partnership. T-Say-Lan's first response was always tactical, but she'd demonstrated enough restraint to be trusted with the difference between assess and attack. Chase reached the interception point 11 minutes after the alert. T-Say-Lan was already positioned elevated, concealed, the canopy providing cover and sight lines that the approaching NA6 would need to look specifically for to detect. The scouts emerged from the undergrowth at the territory's eastern boundary. 3 NA6. Male. Young mid-20s in NA6 terms. Their bodies carried the specific muscular development of a warrior caste, shoulder breadth disproportionate to hip width, the physical architecture of people who trained with bows and blades from childhood. Their war paint was Omaticaya distinctive blue and white patterns that Chase recognized from the film, where the clan's aesthetic had been rendered with the kind of production design precision that made cultural identity visible from 100 meters. The lead scout moved with authority. Not the cautious approach of someone entering unknown territory, the measured stride of someone who considered all territory adjacent to the Omaticaya as functionally their own. Tall even by NA6 standards, broad through the chest, with a queue that hung heavy and thick against his back. His eyes scanned the canopy with the systematic thoroughness of a hunter who'd been taught that threats came from every angle. Chase's meta-knowledge pulsed. The lead scout's physical description matched no one from the first film's background characters. But the confidence, the authority, the way the two flankers deferred to his positioning that matched the character profile of someone who'd been written as the Omaticaya's finest warrior and future clan leader. Too young for Itukan. Too authoritative for a standard scout. If this is who I think it is. Tisailan confirmed it. Her hiss cut through the canopy like a blade. Not a word, a sound. The specific frequency that NA6 used to express recognition combined with hostility, compressed into a single exhalation that carried more emotional content than a paragraph of English. Sute. The name dropped from the branches with the weight of a stone. The lead scout's head snapped up, not startled, not afraid. The reflexive orientation of a warrior who'd heard something and was already assessing its tactical implications. His eyes found Tisailan's position. Not immediately, it took him 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than most observers could have managed. He tracked the sound through canopy acoustics, eliminated branches that couldn't support NA6 weight, and located the silhouette that Tisailan's war paint was designed to break. Relang. Sute's voice was formal. The single word, a clan name, not a personal address, carried the specific diplomatic weight of an NA6 warrior identifying a contact by faction rather than individual. Distance maintained through terminology. The two flankers adjusted position. Not overtly hostile, covering angles, the same way Chase's team covered angles during the patrol confrontation. Professional caution from people who'd been trained to the same standard as the woman in the tree above them. Tisailan dropped from the canopy. The descent was controlled 5 meters, landing in a crouch that placed her between the scouts and the direction of the sanctuary. Her knife stayed sheathed. Her hands were visible, but her posture carried the loaded potential of a person who could transition from diplomatic to lethal in the time it took to blink. Sute Te Rongloetiatan. She used his full name. In NA6 culture, full naming in first contact was a statement of equality. I know who you are, and I name you as a peer, not a superior. Coming from a Relang survivor addressing the Omaticaya's heir apparent, it was also a challenge. Sute's expression didn't change. His eyes, deep gold, older than his face, moved from Tisailan to the jungle behind her. Cataloging. Reading the terrain the way Chase read organizational charts, looking for structure, hierarchy, the signs of something built rather than found. We heard the Relang survivors found shelter. His English was precise, better than Tisailan's, shaped by years of exposure to the Avatar program's cultural exchange initiatives. Each word selected and deployed with the economy of someone who considered excess language a form of weakness. We heard a dreamwalker was building something in the forest. You heard correctly. Show me? No. The refusal landed between them like a dropped blade. Sute's flankers shifted not toward weapons, but toward attention. The casual assessment of scouts who'd expected cooperation and received resistance. The Omaticaya have authority in this region, Sute said. Not threatening, stating. The declarative tone of someone whose clan's territorial claims predated human arrival by centuries. Activity within our domain requires acknowledgement. The Relang acknowledge no one's domain. Tisailan's voice matched his formality and exceeded his certainty. We occupied these forests before the Omaticaya expanded south. Your grandfather's grandfather hunted east of here. Our grandmother's grandmother hunted where you stand. Historical claims. Territorial precedent. The specific currency of interclan relations that had governed NA6 politics since before written history, the layered accounting of who lived where and when, preserved in songs and genealogies that functioned as property deeds. Sute's jaw tightened. The response was micro-expressive, a flicker of recognition that the Relang warrior had produced a historical argument his diplomatic training hadn't prepared a rebuttal for. I have not come to claim, he said. The adjustment was slight but significant, from asserting authority to requesting cooperation. I have come to understand. The Omaticaya observed changes in the forest. New patterns. New activity. New sounds that do not match the cycles we have tracked for generations. He's not lying. The Omaticaya are the region's dominant clan. They track everything in their territory and its borders. Our sanctuary's electromagnetic output, the sabotage's aftermath, the increased NA6 movement from refugees, all of it generates signals that a sophisticated tracking culture would detect. What I can tell you, Tisailan said, is that the Relang have protection. What that protection is, and who provides it, is not yours to know. Not yet. Not yet implies eventually. It implies when trust is earned. The Omaticaya earned nothing from the Relang the last time our clans met. The blow landed. Sute's posture shifted, the faintest straightening, the micro-adjustment of someone absorbing an insult they couldn't deflect because the historical record supported it. The Omaticaya's treatment of Relang refugees 20 years ago was apparently not a proud pages in interclan relations. That was before my time. But not before your clan's memory. And the Relang do not forget. Silence. The jungle breathed around them, insects resuming their clicks, water running somewhere downslope, the background hum of a biological network that 3 Omaticaya scouts had walked into without knowing it existed. Sute looked at Tisei Lan. The assessment was thorough, not the quick scan of a warrior evaluating a threat, but the slower, deeper evaluation of a leader measuring a counterpart. Whatever he found, it didn't diminish him. If anything, the certainty in his bearing solidified. I will report what I've found. Not hostile. Not friendly. Professional. The statement of a scout completing his mission parameters: gather intelligence, assess conditions, return to command. The Omaticaya will decide how to proceed. The Omaticaya may proceed however they wish. The relang will be here. Sute nodded. The gesture was formal acknowledgement of a counterpart's position, not agreement with it. He turned. His flankers fell into formation. The 3 scouts withdrew with the same organized efficiency they'd arrived with, their movement pattern shifting from investigation to extraction, covering their back trail with the professional paranoia of warriors who treated every departure as a potential retreat from ambush. They disappeared into the undergrowth. The jungle closed behind them. The territorial awareness buff tracked their withdrawal until they crossed the 8-kilometer boundary and faded from the network's perception. Tisei Lan's knife hand, which had rested on the sheathed blade throughout the encounter, finally released. Her fingers were white where they'd gripped. Chase dropped from his observation position in the canopy, landed beside her. His heart rate, maintained at a controlled level throughout the encounter by the meditation techniques she'd taught him, ticked upward now that the immediate tension had passed. That was Tsute. Yes. Tisei Lan's voice was tight. Not with the cold analysis she applied to RDA threats, with something older. The specific tension of unresolved history, compressed by years of practice into a professional exterior that the encounter had tested. Future Oloiktan. The Omatikaya's best warrior. And he just found out we exist. He found out the relang exist. Not you. Not the network. Tisei Lan turned. Her eyes held something Chase had never seen in them: not fear, not anger, not the tactical calculation she applied to every situation. Grief. Buried so deep it only surfaced when the architecture above it cracked, and Tsute's presence had been a precisely aimed hammer. The Omaticaya did nothing when my clan burned. They watched from their home tree and decided our survival was not worth their involvement. You told him trust needed to be earned. I told him the truth. Whether he hears it, she stopped. The vulnerability sealed. The armor clicked back into place, and when she spoke again, her voice was the blade edge he knew. He will return. With more scouts. Or with an invitation that is actually a summons. The Omaticaya do not tolerate unknowns in their domain. Through the bond, Grace's analysis arrived, compressed from her Hell's Gate monitoring station. Sute te ronglo itiatan. Omaticaya warrior class. Heir to Oloiktan Itukan. Betrothed to Nitiri te Skaha Moadite. Trained from age 6 in all combat disciplines. Known to the Avatar program as hostile to human presence. Betrothed to Nitiri. The same Nitiri who, in the movie, falls in love with Jake Sully and becomes the catalyst for everything that follows. Sute, the man who loses his betrothed, his pride, and eventually his life in a war that my meta-knowledge says is coming. The information sat in Chase's chest with the weight of a future he'd watched on a screen and now inhabited in flesh. What happens when he comes back? Chase asked. Tisei Lan's expression hardened. The grief, the flash of it, the crack in the armor was gone. Replaced by the tactical assessment that kept her alive. He comes back with authority. An invitation from Itukan, or a summons from Moat. If Moat, she paused on the name, the Tsahik, the spiritual leader. If Moat asks to see you, we go. She is the only Omaticaya whose judgment I trust. And Sute. Sute is the blade. Moat is the hand that holds it. She walked toward the sanctuary. Chase followed. Behind them, the canopy closed over the trail the scouts had taken, the jungle reclaiming the space as if 3 warriors had never walked through it. But they had. And whatever they reported to the Omatikaya's leadership, whatever image they painted of a relang warrior who wouldn't bow and a dream walker who built things in the forest, would determine whether the largest clan in the region became friend, enemy, or the kind of neutral observer whose neutrality was just delayed hostility. Tisei Lan's hands were shaking. Not the knife hand, the other one. The left, the one she used for tasks that didn't require the specific steadiness of combat, eating, adjusting her war paint, the unconscious gestures that filled the spaces between functional movements. That hand trembled against her thigh as she sat on the grotto's upper ledge, and Chase positioned below, not looking directly at her because direct observation of Tisei Lan's vulnerability was a violation she'd punish with distance. Caught the movement through Sainum's peripheral awareness in the bond. His family absorbed refugees. Tisei Lan spoke without preamble. The words came out compressed, a history condensed to its load-bearing elements, stripped of the narrative padding that other speakers used to cushion painful content. My uncle's family. 13 Relang, 20 years ago, when the first RDA clearance took our eastern forests. Grace sat at the pool's edge, day top pad on her knee. She'd returned to the sanctuary within an hour of the scout encounter, ostensibly for specimen collection, actually because the bond's emotional bleed from Tisei Lan had registered at frequencies that demanded physical rather than remote presence. The scientist in Grace recognized a research opportunity. The mentor in her recognized something else. The Omaticaya offered shelter. Called it Tikan Anjil, the Knight's Embrace. A tradition of taking in displaced persons during crisis. Tisei Lan's voice was clinical. The history delivered with the same precision she applied to tactical briefings, each fact positioned for impact rather than sympathy. The embrace was temporary. 3 months. Then the Relang were expected to integrate, adopt Omaticaya customs, defer to Omaticaya leadership, contribute to Omaticaya labor. What happened to your uncle? Adonite asked. The elder sat at his meditation position, staff across his knees. He knew parts of this story. The Relang oral tradition carried the history but not Tisei Lan's personal connection. She'd never shared it. He integrated. His wife integrated. Their children learned Omaticayan instead of Relang. They hunted in Omaticaya formations, prayed to Omaticaya trees, and within 5 years, they were Omaticaya. She paused. The trembling in her left hand intensified, then stopped, cut off by the same muscular control she applied to combat responses. When the second clearance came, when the machines returned for our western forests, my father sent word to the Omaticaya. Asked for warriors. Asked for help. And Itukan sent a message. One sentence. The Omaticaya do not interfere in disputes between humans and clans outside our territory. The grotto's bioluminescence dimmed. Not a system response, a natural fluctuation, the root network cycling through its nocturnal transition. But the timing gave the words a weight that no amount of dramatic lighting could have improved. My father died defending our boundary with 4 hunters and a borrowed bow. My mother died 3 days later, in the retreat. The machines did not differentiate between warriors and people who were simply there. Through the bond, Sanom's grief, resonating with a history he'd lived through in fragments, too young during the clearance to understand the politics, old enough to understand the loss. Adonite's deep, structural sorrow, the elder hearing confirmed what he'd suspected, that the Omaticaya's abandonment of the Relang wasn't policy failure but deliberate choice. And through Sanom's perception of Tisei Lan, the warrior's body language underneath the clinical delivery. The spine too straight. The jaw too tight. The hand that had shaken, now clenched into a fist against her thigh. Every physical indicator of emotion that Tisei Lan's discipline couldn't quite suppress, leaking through the cracks in armor she'd spent 23 years building. Grace set her day top hat down. The scientist who approached everything analytically had recognized the moment for what it was, not data to be processed but grief to be witnessed. She folded her hands. Waited. Chase said nothing. Tisei Lan didn't need comfort. She needed an audience that wouldn't flinch. Tsute was a child when the Omaticaya refused. He was not responsible. But he carries the clan's decision the way I carry my mother's death as inherited debt. When he stood in our territory and spoke of Omaticaya authority, the words stopped. Tisei Lan's teeth closed on the sentence, biting off the emotion that had started to bleed through. He represented the clan that abandoned yours, Chase finished. Not interpretation translation. The same skill he'd used in project meetings when a team member couldn't articulate the core issue because the core issue was personal and the meeting was professional. Tisei Lan's yellow eyes found his. The look held for 3 seconds, the same duration as their first meeting, knife at throat, measuring the Dreamwalker. But the context had shifted so far from that moment that the shared measurement produced a different result. Not can I kill this person, but does this person understand what I'm telling him? Yes. Grace's research filled the intelligence gap. The Omaticaya file in the RDA's Avatar program database was extensive. 15 years of cultural observation, diplomatic contact, and linguistic analysis compiled by a succession of researchers whose primary subject had been the clan's internal dynamics. Grace had access to all of it through her program credentials, and she fed the data to the network through the bond in compressed analytical packets. Omaticaya hierarchy, patriarchal military leadership, Oloik Tani Tukan, paired with matriarchal spiritual authority, Sahik Emoat. Decision-making was dual: military matters deferred to Itukan, spiritual matters to Emoat, and anything that didn't fit cleanly into either category required consensus between both leaders. Tsute's position, heir to the Oloik Tan role through betrothal to Nitiri, Itukan and Emoat's daughter. A traditionalist. Protective of clan autonomy to the point of isolationism. Hostile toward the Avatar program specifically and human presence generally. His diplomatic framework was built on a simple principle: the Omaticaya controlled their domain, and everything within it operated by Omaticaya rules or was expelled. Emoat's position, spiritual leader, seer, the clan's primary interface with Eywa through Tsahelo at the Tree of Voices. Grace's notes: personal observations from years of cultural exchange described Emoat as perceptive beyond what science could explain. She sees things in people that they haven't shown. She judges not what you are but what you're becoming. Emoat. The Tsahik. The one character in the film who looked at Jake Sully, a marine who'd been sent to manipulate her people and saw something underneath the mission that was worth cultivating. If Tsute defines us to the Omaticaya leadership, Chase said, we're an unauthorized settlement in their domain. A rogue dreamwalker harboring displaced NA6. A political problem that's most efficiently solved by absorption or expulsion. Correct. Grace's analytical mode was engaged, the lecturer working through implications with the systematic precision of someone grading a thesis. But if Emoat sees us first, if she evaluates the sanctuary's connection to Eywa through her own spiritual framework, the evaluation changes. We're not a political problem. We're a spiritual phenomenon. You think she'll recognize the system? I think Emoat has spent 60 years communicating with Eywa through traditional Tsahelo. What we've built here, the nodes, the bindings, the organized root network, is Eywa doing something she hasn't done in living NA6 memory. Emoat will want to understand it. Her curiosity is our leverage. Through the bond, Norm's contribution, transmitted from his evening shift at Hell's Gate. The Utral Imokraya tradition isn't unique to the Relang. I've found references in Omaticaya liturgical texts fragmentary, interpreted as metaphor by most scholars. But Emoat isn't most scholars. If the Relang preserved the full tradition, she'll recognize the framework even if her own clan's version is incomplete. Spiritual legitimacy through the Tsahik. That's the play. Chase pulled up the system interface. The territorial map showed 2 nodes, 8 kilometers of influence, 6 citizens generating faith that the network's architecture converted into operational capacity. Small. Fragile. A settlement that a single Omaticaya war party could overrun in hours if the decision were made. But the settlement was connected to Eywa. The nodes were part of the planetary network. The binding was real, the system was real, and the Tsahik of the largest clan in the region was, by profession and calling, the person most qualified to evaluate whether what Chase had built was genuine or fraudulent. We need Emoat to see us before Tsute defines us, Chase said. If the Omatikaya's first formal assessment comes through military channels Tsute's warriors, Itukin's authority we're a security problem. If it comes through spiritual channels Emoat's evaluation, Eywa's validation we're a phenomenon. And how, Tsay Lan's voice cut from the ledge, do you propose to get Emoat here before Tsute returns with warriors? The question was legitimate. Tsute's report would reach Omaticaya leadership within days. The response, whether diplomatic summons or military probe, would follow within a week. The window for establishing spiritual precedent over political framing was narrow and closing. We don't get Emoat here, Chase said. We go to her. The grotto went quiet. Through the bond, 5 emotional responses, each carrying the weight of what the proposal implied. Going to the Omaticaya meant entering their territory, submitting to their authority for the duration of the visit, exposing the network's administrator to a clan whose best warrior had already been dispatched to investigate, and whose political leadership had a documented history of viewing outsiders as resources to be managed rather than peers to be respected. That is not wise, Adonite said. Not refusal assessment. The elder who'd survived 6 decades of NA6 politics measuring the proposal against his experience. No, but it's necessary. If Tsute reports before we make contact, the narrative is set. We're invaders. Squatters. A rogue element that needs to be brought under control. Chase looked at Tsay Lan. I need your knowledge of Omaticaya protocols. How do we request an audience with Emoat without going through Tsute or Itukin? Tsay Lan's trembling hand had stilled. The personal history, her uncle, her parents, the abandonment had been filed and sealed. The warrior was operational again, processing the diplomatic problem with the tactical precision she'd applied to every challenge since arriving at the sanctuary. The Tsahik receives petitioners at the Tree of Voices on the 3rd night after full moon. Any NA6 may approach during the vigil. No warriors may interfere. The space is sacred, and Emoat's authority within it is absolute. When is the next vigil? 3 days. 3 days. The same window Tsute would use to report and receive orders. A race between the military and spiritual tracks of Omaticaya governance, and the outcome would depend on which channel processed faster. Grace was already calculating. If Tsute left the territory at 1400 today, he reaches home tree by nightfall. Report to Itukin tomorrow morning. Itukin deliberates. He's cautious, not impulsive. Decision by day 49 at the earliest. Response deployment by day 50. The vigil is day 50. Chase turned to Tsay Lan. Can we make it? Tsay Lan's expression was unreadable. The warrior who'd refused to enter the Omatikaya's territory for 20 years, whose family's destruction was directly connected to that clan's political choices, was being asked to walk into the place she'd spent a lifetime avoiding. I will take you. The words cost her something visible, a tightening at the jaw, a straightening of the spine. Not because I trust the Omaticaya. Because Emoat is the only Omaticaya whose judgment I trust. And because she paused, the same hesitation from the eve of the sabotage, the almost speech that had formed and died on her lips, because my people need more than one dreamwalker's protection. Even a dreamwalker who keeps his promises. The acknowledgement a dreamwalker who keeps his promises was the closest Tsay Lan had come to expressing something that the word approval couldn't quite contain and the word trust overreached. 3 days, Chase said. We prepare, we travel, and we let Emoat decide what we are. Through the bond, the network hummed with the specific vibration of a community about to take its largest risk since a man in the wrong body had stumbled through a waterfall and found something worth building. Grace packed her specimen kit, half research equipment, half diplomatic preparation. At night began a chant that would last until they departed. Sainum studied maps of Omaticaya territory that the training manual's appendix contained. Norm monitored RDA channels for any indication that the military track had accelerated. And Tsay Lan sharpened her knife. Not because it needed it. Because the sound was familiar, and familiar things were anchors when the current tried to pull you somewhere you'd spent 20 years refusing to go. The summons arrived the next morning, not from Emoat, but from Itukin. Formal. Diplomatic. Delivered by a scout who'd been running since before dawn. The Oloik Tan of the Omaticaya demands that the dreamwalker who builds in the forest present himself at Kalutral within 3 days. Failure to appear will be interpreted as hostility. Not a vigil invitation. A summons. The military track had beaten the spiritual one. Chase read the message through Sainum's awareness. The boy had intercepted the scout at the territory boundary and felt the plan crack along a fault line he'd anticipated but hoped wouldn't materialize. 3 days. Not to petition Emoat at the Tree of Voices. To answer Itukin at home tree, with Tsute's assessment already shaping the conversation. The vigil was the same night as the summons deadline. 2 meetings, overlapping, requiring different approaches and carrying different consequences. The military and the spiritual, both demanding his presence at the same time in the same place. Through the bond, Grace's assessment. Go to both. Answer Itukin's summons formally. Then petition MOAT at the vigil. Use the overlap. The spiritual evaluation happening in the same location means MOAT will be present for the military assessment. She'll see how you handle Itukin's questions. That's its own kind of test. 2 audiences. 1 night. The most important diplomatic engagement of my life, conducted in a language I don't fully speak, under the judgment of leaders whose clan abandoned my people. Tiseilan's knife scraped stone. The sound carried the specific rhythm of preparation not for combat, but for the return to a place she'd spent 2 decades learning to live without.